Hey there, tonight we're diving into the curious tale of how the Puritans tried to cancel Christmas. Turns out, their idea of a festive season was more about fasting than feasting. If these stories help you unwind, I'd love a quick like or subscribe, but only if they're genuinely working for you. I'm curious where in the world you're listening from, so drop your location and local time in the comments. It's amazing seeing our little community span the globe through these historical tales. Now find your comfort zone, perhaps turn on a fan for that gentle background hum, and let's venture into tonight's story together. The Puritans, a group so famously uptight that even their shadows were said to be straight-laced. Picture a bunch of folks who looked at the world and thought, you know what this place needs? More rules. And in the 17th century, they packed their stern beliefs, a few drab outfits, and set sail for the New World on a boat called the Mayflower, which was about as luxurious as a soggy wooden crate, only more crowded, talking around 102 passengers crammed into a space that would make a modern studio apartment seem palatial. Now, why would anyone leave the comforts of home for a perilous journey across the Atlantic? Well, the Puritans were on a mission, no pun intended. They were fed up with the Church of England, which they found about as spiritually nourishing as a stale piece of bread. The Puritans had a vision. A society where everyone was equally miserable in their piety. So they ventured to what they saw as a blank canvas, eager to paint it with a single color, monochrome. But let's zoom in on their beef with Christmas, a holiday that, by their standards, was basically a carnival of chaos. You see, the Puritans had zero tolerance for fun, and Christmas, in 17th century England, was a 12-day extravaganza of revelry. It involved excessive feasting, drinking, and gasp games. Imagine the horror to the Puritans. It was like someone had combined Mardi Gras with a frat party and slapped a religious label on it. They were not amused. And if that wasn't scandalous enough, the origins of Christmas were a veritable grab bag of pagan traditions. The Puritans had done their homework, and they knew that December 25th was originally a Roman festival called Saturnalia, a winter solstice celebration dedicated to Saturn, the god of agriculture. It featured gift-giving, role reversal, and public intoxication. Basically, everything the Puritans despised. In their eyes, Christmas was like trying to smuggle a wolf into a sheep's pen by dressing it in wool. So, when the Puritans landed in the New World, they were determined to banish this irreverent holiday. They figured if they were going to build a new society from the ground up, they might as well start with a clean slate, one that didn't involve decking the halls or roasting chestnuts. And they didn't just frown upon Christmas. They legally cancelled it. In 1659, the General Court of the Massachusetts Bay Colony went so far as to impose a 5-shilling fine on anyone caught celebrating. That's about $50 in today's money, enough to make you think twice about humming Jingle Bells. To the Puritans, celebrating Christmas was akin to dancing around a bonfire of heresy. They couldn't abide the idea of people enjoying themselves under the guise of religion. For them, faith was a solemn affair, not an excuse for merriment. They wanted a society as stark as their black and white attire, where the only bells ringing were alarm bells warning against sin. In a way, the Puritans were the original party poopers. They saw themselves as moral custodians, determined to sweep away the frivolities of the old world. They envisioned a community where the only thing that sparkled was the sharpness of their convictions. While their intentions were sincere, their methods were as harsh as a New England winter. Their no-fun policies might seem extreme to us now, but in their minds, they were safeguarding their society from moral decay. So there they were, the Puritans, standing firm against Christmas like Ebenezer Scrooge on a mission from God. They were determined to create a new world in their own image, even if it meant sacrificing every last bit of seasonal joy. And as they set about building their austere utopia, they probably didn't realize they were also crafting a legacy of grinchiness that would echo through the centuries. In the end, the Puritans' war on Christmas wasn't just a battle against a holiday. It was a struggle to define their identity in a world that often seemed hostile to their beliefs. They were like the historical equivalent of that friend who insists on kale smoothies at a pizza party, earnest, well-meaning, but ultimately outnumbered by those who just want to enjoy a slice of life. Their dream of a Christmas-free society didn't exactly last, but their story remains a fascinating chapter in the annals of history. a reminder that even the most rigid of visions can be softened by the passage of time and the irresistible allure of a good holiday cookie. So, as the Puritans waged their war on Christmas, imagine them as the historical equivalent of those folks who complain about pumpkin spice lattes in September, except with more fire and brimstone. They were determined to scrub their society clean of anything that whiffed of merriment, and leading this charge was none other than Governor William Bradford. Bradford, a man with a face as stern as a Puritan sermon, took his role as moral watchdog very seriously. He wasn't just the guy who banned fun. He was the guy who banned fun and then wrote a sternly worded pamphlet about it. Now, in the Massachusetts Bay Colony, Christmas wasn't just seen as a holiday. It was viewed as a gateway to moral decay. And in 1659, the Puritans decided enough was enough. The General Court passed a law that was as subtle as a sledgehammer, a 5-shilling fine for anyone caught celebrating Christmas. 5 shillings might not sound like a ton today, but back then it was enough to make you reconsider your holiday plans. It was like charging $500 for a holiday selfie. This was not just about the money. It was a statement, a Puritan version of a mic drop. But why such a harsh stance on Christmas? Well, to the Puritans, Christmas was like a Trojan horse of sin. It was an impostor holiday, pretending to be holy while sneaking in all sorts of unsanctioned festivities. To them, it was like inviting a rock band to a monastery and expecting Gregorian chants. The Puritans were all about keeping things pious and ordered, and Christmas, with its roots tangled in pagan traditions, was the antithesis of their vision. They saw it as an unholy mashup of Saturnalia's rowdiness and the excesses of English revelry, neither of which were on the puritanical menu. The public's reaction, however, was not as puritanical as their leaders hoped. It turns out that people, even in the 17th century, were fond of a bit of holiday cheer. Picture a society where the government is basically saying, no fun allowed, and you've got a recipe for rebellion. Don't forget, this was a time when people didn't have Netflix or TikTok to distract them. A bit of holiday revelry was one of the few entertainments available. But in the Massachusetts Bay Colony, Christmas became the holiday that must not be named. Celebrating it was practically an act of civil disobedience. Yet, despite the crackdown, the Puritans couldn't entirely extinguish the Christmas spirit. People found creative ways to skirt the law. It was like trying to stop a snowball rolling down a hill. The more they pushed against it, the more it seemed to grow. Some colonists would celebrate behind closed doors, whispering carols like they were passing state secrets. Others would exchange gifts in hushed tones, as if handing off contraband. The Puritan authorities were like the Grinches who tried to steal Christmas, but the spirit of the season proved surprisingly resilient. But let's not romanticize this too much. The Puritan crackdown was harsh and effective in many ways. They managed to keep public celebrations to a minimum for a time, and the fear of being fined was real. It's important to remember that the Puritans were not just a bunch of curmudgeons. They were people with deeply held beliefs, trying to forge a new world that aligned with their strict moral compass. To them, Christmas wasn't just a day. It was a symbol of everything they had left behind in the old world, a world they saw as corrupt and hedonistic. In their quest for religious purity, the Puritans were willing to sacrifice the joy of the season. They were the original bar humbug crowd, convinced that their austere way of life was the path to salvation. But even in their determination, they couldn't fully quash human nature. The desire to celebrate, to gather, and to find joy in the darkest months of the year was something that laws and fines couldn't entirely suppress. As the years rolled on, the Puritan hold on Christmas slowly began to wane. The colony grew, new settlers arrived, and the rigid grip of Puritanism started to loosen. The Puritans may have been able to legislate against Christmas, but they couldn't legislate against change. The very world they sought to control was evolving, and with it, the unyielding ice of their convictions began to melt. In the end, the Puritans' attempt to cancel Christmas is a tale as old as time. The story of a group trying to impose its will on human nature, only to find that human nature is a stubborn beast. It's a reminder that while laws can change behavior, they can't change the human heart. The Puritans may have tried to create a society devoid of Christmas cheer, but what they ended up doing was highlighting the very resilience of the human spirit. And that, ironically, is something worth celebrating. But the Puritans were about to learn a lesson in the persistence of joy. As their grip on the colonies tightened, the settlers' determination to keep Christmas alive grew stronger, like a flame that flickers even in the harshest wind. It wasn't long before the holiday started slipping through the Puritans' fingers, much like trying to hold water in a sieve. The wider impact of the Puritans' no-tinsel policy was as predictable as it was inevitable. People started pushing back. Imagine being told you couldn't celebrate Christmas. A holiday that, for many, was the only bright spot in a relentless cycle of toil and survival. It was like telling a child they had to eat all their vegetables, but dessert was permanently off the menu. Naturally, folks weren't thrilled. And so, Christmas celebrations were driven underground, with all the subtlety of a spy ring passing notes in invisible ink. People gathered in secret, their festivities as covert as a Cold War espionage operation. Families would whisper carols in their homes, the sound barely more than a murmur, like mice singing in the walls. It was less deck the halls and more keep it down, or we'll be fined. In some cases, Christmas cheer was hidden in plain sight. Take the anecdote of one enterprising settler who allegedly disguised his Christmas feast as a regular dinner. His family sat around the table, eating roast goose with all the trimmings, while pretending it was just another Wednesday night meal. It was the 17th century version of having your cake and eating it too. Just don't call it a Christmas cake. The backlash wasn't just about secret celebrations, though. The Puritans' ban created a cultural schism that rippled through the colonies. As more settlers arrived, bringing with them their own customs and traditions, the Puritans found themselves increasingly outnumbered by those who saw Christmas not as a threat, but as a cherished tradition. It was like trying to stop a river with a picket fence, feudal at best. In the more diverse and sprawling colonies, where puritanical control was weaker, Christmas found a way to thrive. Virginia, for example, with its Anglican roots, was less inclined to give up its festive traditions. Their Christmas was celebrated openly, complete with feasts and merriment. It must have seemed like a different world to those in the Massachusetts Bay Colony, where the holiday was treated like some kind of contagious disease. The economic realities of the colonies also played a part in undermining the Puritan ban. For tradesmen and merchants, Christmas was a time when demand for goods increased, and with it, the opportunity to profit. In a society where every shilling counted, the economic incentive to allow Christmas celebrations was hard to ignore. After all, nothing sparks a bit of holiday cheer like a boost to the bottom line. But what happened if you got caught indulging in a bit of Yuletide cheer? Well, if you were unlucky, the consequences could be severe. Those caught were hauled before the authorities, facing public humiliation and that dreaded 5-shilling fine. It was like getting a parking ticket for singing Silent Night, an absurdity that highlighted the chasm between the Puritan rulers and their subjects. Despite the threat of fines and public shaming, the spirit of Christmas was irrepressible. The Puritans might have been experts in austere living, but they underestimated the power of tradition, community, and let's face it, the sheer stubbornness of human nature. People yearned for connection and celebration, especially in the long, dark winters of New England. It was a need as innate as breathing. And so, the Puritans found themselves in a peculiar position. They had crossed an ocean to escape religious persecution, only to impose their own brand of it on others. Their attempt to cancel Christmas was a clear case of do as I say, not as I do. The irony was as thick as the snow that blanketed their austere settlements. As the colonies continued to grow and diversify, the Puritan hold on Christmas began to slip. New waves of immigrants arrived, bringing fresh perspectives and traditions that slowly eroded the strictures of the past. The Puritans' dream of a Christmas-free society was unraveling, thread by thread, like a hastily wrapped present. In the end, the Puritans' war on Christmas is a reminder of the limits of control. It's a tale of how laws can dictate behavior, but not belief. The Puritans might have banned Christmas in a legal sense, but they couldn't ban it from the hearts and minds of the people. A lesson as relevant today as it was in the 17th century. And as we leave the Puritans to ponder their next move, remember that history is rich with stories of resilience, rebellion, and the enduring power of the human spirit to find joy, even in the most unexpected places. The Puritans' icy grip on Christmas was beginning to thaw, thanks in no small part to the political climate across the pond. Enter the restoration of the English monarchy in 1660, like a royal deus ex machina, to shake things up. When Charles Roman II reclaimed the throne, he brought back more than just a crown and a flair for the dramatic. He ushered in a wave of change that rippled across the Atlantic, touching even the Puritans' austere settlements. Ah, Charles Roman II, a king who knew how to throw a party. If the Puritans were the ultimate party poopers, Charles was their antithesis, a monarch who couldn't have been more different if he tried. The Restoration era was practically a renaissance of revelry, a period when decadence and delight were back on the menu. This was a time when Christmas was celebrated with gusto, a 12-day extravaganza of feasting, dancing, and yes, a whole lot of drinking. The term Merry Old England wasn't coined from thin air, after all. For the Puritans, this was a nightmare scenario. Imagine them clutching their Bibles a little tighter as news of England's festive resurgence trickled across the ocean. They were like strict parents who had just discovered their child was secretly a DJ at an underground rave. Their worst fears were confirmed. Christmas was back, and it was bigger and bolder than ever. The Restoration didn't just change the cultural landscape, it also shifted the economic dynamics. Suddenly, colonies had a very real incentive to play nice with England. Trade was the lifeblood of the colonial economy, and with the Restoration, England opened its arms and its ports to commerce. The New World was teeming with resources, from timber to tobacco, and England was eager to capitalize on this bounty. But to do business, the colonies needed to align themselves with English customs and traditions, Christmas included. In essence, the Puritans faced a choice: embrace Christmas or risk economic isolation. It was like being stuck between a rock and a hard place. Only the rock was a pile of unsold goods, and the hard place was a stern letter from Charles Roman II. The colonies needed England, and England loved Christmas. Simple as that. So, gradually, the holiday began to creep back into public life, as inexorable as the tide. Economically speaking, Christmas was a boon. Merchants saw their profits swell as demand for holiday goods surged. It was an early lesson in the power of consumerism, one that would echo through the centuries. Suddenly, Christmas wasn't just a religious observance, it was an economic opportunity. Picture a colonial shopkeeper rubbing his hands with glee as customers lined up to buy seasonal wares. The Puritans might have detested the holiday's pagan origins, but they couldn't deny the allure of a bulging coin purse. The social fabric of the colonies was also evolving. More settlers arrived with each passing year, bringing diverse traditions and beliefs. The rigid homogeneity of the early Puritan settlements was giving way to a patchwork of cultures and customs. It was like watching a black and white film slowly blossom into technicolor, each new hue adding depth and vibrancy to the colonial tapestry. As the colonies grew, so too did the appetite for celebration. The long winters were harsh, and people craved moments of joy to break the monotony. Christmas offered a reprieve from the grind, a chance to gather, eat, drink, and be merry. It was a tradition that transcended religious boundaries, appealing to the universal human need for connection and community. But let's not pretend this was a seamless transition. The Puritan old guard didn't just roll over and embrace the holiday with open arms. There were tensions, debates, and more than a few stern sermons. Picture a Puritan minister railing against the evils of Christmas from the pulpit, his voice echoing through a half-empty church as the congregation slipped away to join a festive gathering. It was a battle of wills, and while the Puritans were steadfast, the tide of change proved relentless. The Restoration didn't just restore the monarchy, it restored a sense of cultural continuity that had been fractured by years of conflict. Suddenly, Christmas wasn't just an English tradition, it was a symbol of unity and heritage. For many colonists, celebrating Christmas was a way to connect with their roots, to honor the customs of the motherland while forging a new identity in a foreign land. In time, even the most die-hard Puritans had to acknowledge the shifting sands. It wasn't an overnight transformation, but a gradual erosion of their rigid stance. The Puritan dream of a Christmas-free society was fading, like footprints in the sand washed away by the tide. Still, it's important to remember that this wasn't just a story of surrender. The Puritans had left an indelible mark on the colonies, their legacy woven into the very fabric of American society. They may have lost the battle against Christmas, but their influence would endure, shaping the values and beliefs of generations to come. In the end, the Puritans' war on Christmas is a testament to the power of tradition, resilience, and the human spirit's unyielding desire for joy. It's a reminder that while laws can dictate behavior, they can't suppress the heart's longing for celebration. The Puritans may have tried to cancel Christmas, but in doing so, they inadvertently highlighted the holiday's enduring appeal, a legacy that continues to sparkle, like twinkling lights on a winter's night. And as the colonies moved forward, embracing the warmth and cheer of the season, they carried with them a piece of the past, a reminder of the complexities and contradictions that define the human experience. And so, as the Puritans begrudgingly watched their resistance crumble like a stale gingerbread house, Christmas began its slow metamorphosis into the holiday juggernaut we know today. If the Puritans' campaign against Christmas was a stiff upper lip to frivolity, the modern celebration is more like a full-throated carol, complete with all the trimmings. This transformation didn't happen overnight, but rather evolved over centuries, shaped by nostalgia, commercialization, and the unyielding human spirit that insists on finding joy amidst life's chaos. By the 19th century, Christmas had undergone a facelift worthy of a reality TV makeover. Thanks to a little help from our old friend Charles Dickens, whose 1843 novella, A Christmas Carol, did more for Christmas than any marketing executive ever could, the holiday started to acquire its warm, fuzzy glow. Dickens tapped into a burgeoning Victorian sentimentality, wrapping Christmas in themes of family, charity, and redemption. It was a narrative that resonated deeply with a society grappling with the harsh realities of industrialization. Yet, the Victorian Christmas wasn't just about warm fuzzies. It was also about cold, hard cash. Enter the age of commercialization. As the Industrial Revolution churned out goods at an unprecedented rate, merchants realized that Christmas could be a gold mine. By the late 1800, retailers were already decking their halls with boughs of profit margins, transforming Christmas into an economic powerhouse. Santa Claus, that jolly old elf, became the poster boy for this commercial revolution, a beacon of consumerism who'd make even the most cynical Puritan roll in their grave. But let's pause to unpack the arrival of Santa, a character cobbled together from various traditions like some kind of festive Frankenstein. His roots can be traced back to St. Nicholas, a 4th century Greek bishop renowned for his generosity. Fast forward to the Dutch settlers in America, who brought with them tales of Sinterklaas, a figure who bore a striking resemblance to the jolly fellow we know today. By the time Coca-Cola got their hands on him in the 1930s, Santa was a full-blown celebrity, complete with a red suit and a marketing campaign to rival any Hollywood blockbuster. Of course, not everyone was thrilled with this commercial turn. Critics lamented the loss of Christmas's spiritual core, decrying the holiday's transformation into a capitalist free-for-all. But despite their protests, the allure of a holiday that promised both personal joy and economic gain proved irresistible. Like it or not, Christmas had become a linchpin of the economy, a season that could make or break a retailer's year. Now, let's talk about nostalgia, that warm, syrupy feeling that makes us view the past through rose-tinted glasses. It's no accident that Christmas became a repository for nostalgia. The holiday is practically tailor-made for it. From the crackling of a fireplace to the scent of evergreen, Christmas is a sensory overload that beckons us back to simpler times. Never mind that those simpler times were often anything, but nostalgia has a way of smoothing out the rough edges, leaving us with a glossy, sepia-toned version of history. This nostalgic longing was further fueled by the rise of mass media. Radio and later, television brought Christmas into living rooms across the nation, weaving it into the very fabric of American culture. Bing Crosby's White Christmas, a song that pines for a holiday blanketed in snow, became the best-selling single of all time, proving that even in the midst of World War II, people yearned for the comfort of a familiar tune. It was a testament to the power of nostalgia, a kind of collective wish for peace and joy in a world marred by conflict. As for the Puritans, they would likely be scandalized to see what Christmas has become. Their austere vision of a pious society seems almost quaint in comparison to the modern holiday's kaleidoscope of lights, sounds, and smells. But perhaps, in their rigid insistence on a monochrome world, the Puritans unwittingly set the stage for Christmas's technicolor explosion. Their failure to extinguish the spirit of the holiday only proved its resilience, underscoring the human need for celebration and connection. Today, Christmas is a global phenomenon, celebrated by billions across diverse cultures and religions. It's a holiday that transcends its Christian origins, embracing a universal message of hope and goodwill. In a world that often seems fractured and divided, Christmas stands as a beacon of unity, a reminder that, at least for one day, we can put aside our differences and come together in celebration. Yet, even as we revel in the sparkle of the season, it's worth remembering the complex history that brought us here. Christmas is a tapestry woven from threads of tradition, commerce, and nostalgia, a holiday that has been shaped and reshaped by centuries of change. It's a story of persistence, adaptation, and the enduring human spirit, a reminder that even in the darkest of times, we can find light. So, as we hang our stockings and trim our trees, let's spare a thought for the Puritans, those stern-faced pioneers who tried and failed to cancel Christmas. In their quest for purity, they inadvertently highlighted the holiday's enduring appeal, a legacy that continues to shine brightly, like a star atop a Christmas tree. And as we gather with family and friends, sharing stories and laughter, we honor not just the traditions of the past, but the spirit of resilience and joy that defines the human experience. In the end, the transformation of Christmas is a testament to the power of tradition and the unyielding human desire for connection and celebration. It's a reminder that while history is often shaped by those who seek to control it, it is ultimately defined by the people who live it. And so, as we celebrate the holiday in our own ways, we carry forward the legacy of those who came before us, a legacy of resilience, perseverance, and the timeless joy of the season. And there you have it, the long, winding journey of Christmas, from a Puritan no-go zone to the glittering global celebration we know today. It's a story as rich and layered as a holiday fruitcake, though decidedly more appetizing. So, whether you're roasting chestnuts on an open fire or simply enjoying the company of loved ones, remember that Christmas is more than just a holiday. It's a testament to the enduring power of tradition, the spirit of community, and the unquenchable human desire for joy. And that, dear friends, is a legacy worth celebrating. If you were strolling along the banks of the Nile around 1070 BCE and decided to head south, you might have stumbled upon a bustling scene that would make today's Cairo traffic seem like a quiet country road. Welcome to the Kingdom of Kush, nestled in what we now call Sudan. This wasn't just some backwater patch of sand, but a thriving civilization that often played second fiddle to Egypt's jazz hands in the history books. Yet, the Kingdom of Kush was no mere understudy. It was a powerhouse in its own right, with a knack for trade, a flair for military strategy, and a history that would make any storyteller's mouth water. Now, here's the thing. Talking about Kush without mentioning Egypt is like discussing Batman and pretending Robin doesn't exist. The two were intertwined like a pair of tangled earbuds. But let's not put the cart before the chariot. Kush's origin story begins in the heart of the African continent, amid the harsh yet fertile lands that hug the mighty Nile. With its roots stretching back over 3 millennia, around 1070 BCE, this kingdom was strategically planted at the crossroads of African trade routes. And when I say crossroads, I mean it was the Times Square of the ancient world, minus the neon lights and costumed mascots. Geographically speaking, Kush was the perfect combination of real estate and location. Nestled between the first and sixth cataracts of the Nile, it was ideally positioned to control the flow of goods, culture, and sometimes armies between Central Africa and Egypt. Imagine the Nile as the ancient equivalent of an interstate highway, and Kush was that crucial rest stop where everyone, from Egyptian pharaohs to African traders, had to take a breather. The land was rich with resources like gold, ebony, and ivory, which were as coveted in the ancient world as the latest iPhone is today. The Kushites were no strangers to the Egyptians. By the time the Kingdom of Kush really started to flex its muscles, Egypt had already been through a few hundred years of its own storied existence. These two neighbors had a relationship that could be best described as complicated. There were times when Egypt looked at Kush with envy, and other times with the annoyance reserved for a younger sibling who suddenly got better grades. But let's not sugarcoat it. They were often locked in a bitter rivalry over who got to wear the crown of supremacy in the region. Archaeological finds have given us a peek into this ancient soap opera. The city of Kerma, one of Kush's earliest capitals, was a bustling hub long before anyone thought to build pyramids in the neighborhood. Excavations have unearthed colossal statues, intricate pottery, and evidence of a society that thrived on agriculture and trade. These folks weren't just sitting around waiting for the Egyptians to swoop in. They were building an empire with their own hands. Speaking of swooping in, the Egyptians made their mark around 1500 BCE, when Pharaoh Thutmose decided Kush was the perfect place for a little expansion project. The Egyptians occupied Kush for a few hundred years, turning it into a province and mining the area for all it was worth, literally. But like all good things, it couldn't last. Around 1070 BCE, Egypt's grip loosened, and the Kushites seized their chance to rise from the ashes of occupation like a phoenix with an attitude. They established a new capital at Napata, a city that would become the heart of the Kushite kingdom. While Egypt was busy dealing with its own internal dramas, think Game of Thrones, but with more eyeliner, Kush rebuilt and rebranded itself as a formidable power in the region. They adopted many aspects of Egyptian culture, like their guards, architecture, and writing, but gave them a distinctly Kushite twist. It's as if they took all the best parts of Egyptian civilization and decided to remix them into something uniquely their own. The relationship between Kush and Egypt was one of both admiration and animosity. The Kushites saw the splendor of Egyptian culture and thought, we'll have what they're having, but with a side of Kushite flair. Yet, they were not content to simply mimic. They were innovators. They constructed their own pyramids at sites like Meroe and Napata, albeit shorter and steeper than the Egyptian originals, perhaps a reflection of their own distinct vision. As the Kushites solidified their empire, they became a force to be reckoned with, both in trade and in military prowess. They were not just exporting goods, but also ideas, a cultural exchange that would see Kushite influences permeate northward into Egypt. The kingdom was a melting pot of African, Egyptian, and later Greco-Roman influences, making it as cosmopolitan as an ancient city could get. But here's a nugget of truth that's often glossed over. The kingdom of Kush wasn't just a shadow of Egypt. It was a beacon of African civilization in its own right. The romanticized notion of Kush as merely a footnote in Egypt's story is one of those myths that historians love to debunk. This was a kingdom that had its own dynasties, its own heroes, and its own stories that deserve to be told with as much enthusiasm as any tale of pharaohs and pyramids. In the end, Kush's story is a testament to resilience and reinvention. It's about a forgotten empire that refuses to be forgotten, a kingdom that carved out its place in history with as much determination as any of its more famous contemporaries. So, next time you hear the echoes of ancient civilizations, listen carefully, and you might just catch the whispers of Kush, reminding us all that they, too, were once kings of the Nile. And speaking of kings of the Nile, let's dive into the reign of a monarch who didn't just dip his toes into the Egyptian waters, but cannonballed right in, King Pi. Now, if you've ever thought about conquering your neighbors, Pi is someone you'd want on speed dial. Around 730 BCE, this Kushite king decided it was high time to make Egypt a part of his growing empire. Picture this, a Kushite ruler with a vision as grand as the pyramids and a strategy more complex than assembling flat-pack furniture without instructions. Pi wasn't just any ruler. He was a man with a plan, ambition, and let's be honest, a flair for the dramatic. He saw Egypt not just as a rival or a nuisance, but as an opportunity, an ancient fixer-upper with potential. His conquest of Egypt wasn't just a military maneuver. It was a masterclass in diplomacy, strategy, and a bit of showmanship. The guy understood the art of war and the subtleties of cultural conquest. But let's not gloss over the fact that this was no walk in the park. Egypt at the time was a patchwork of city-states, each with its own warlord, like a reality show with too many contestants. Pi marched north with his army in what can only be described as a logistical nightmare. Imagine trying to keep an army fed and watered as they trudged through desert heat. Yet, against the odds, Pi successfully united Upper and Lower Egypt under his rule. This wasn't just a footnote in history. It was a seismic shift in power dynamics along the Nile. Pi's victory was immortalized in a granite stela, a stone tablet that reads like the ancient world's version of a victory tweet. It didn't just boast of his military might, but also of his piety and divine favor, because why not add a touch of divine right to your resume? Now, let's talk about the real MVPs behind Pi's success: trade and resources. Kush was sitting on a veritable gold mine, literally. The kingdom was rich in minerals like gold and iron, and let's not forget the ivory, enough to make any ancient trader drool. These commodities were the lifeblood of Kush's economy. Gold wasn't just for bling. It was the currency that oiled the wheels of diplomacy and trade. Kushite gold was highly sought after in Egypt, which made Pi's conquest not just a strategic victory, but an economic jackpot. With Egypt under Kushite control, trade routes multiplied like rabbits. The kingdom became a bustling hub of commerce, trading with regions as far afield as the Mediterranean and the Red Sea. Kush was the place to be if you wanted to get your hands on luxury goods or raw materials. Think of it as the Amazon of the ancient world, minus the 2-day shipping. Iron, the new kid on the block in terms of metallurgy, was a game changer. It gave Kush a technological edge, turning their army into a formidable force. Forget bronze. Iron was the new black. But here's where things get interesting. Ruling two cultures with vastly different customs was like trying to juggle cats. The Egyptians had a bureaucracy that could rival modern-day governments, with more scribes than you could shake a papyrus scroll at. The Kushites, on the other hand, had their own system of governance, less rigid but no less effective. The challenge was to integrate these systems without stepping on too many toes, or, worse, starting a rebellion. Pi, ever the pragmatist, left many of the existing Egyptian structures in place, appointing local officials to keep the peace. It was a move of sheer genius, or perhaps just good sense. The cultural aspect of Kushite rule in Egypt was like a mashup of two very different playlists. The Kushites admired Egyptian art, religion, and architecture, but they put their own spin on it, creating a fusion that was uniquely theirs. Temples were built, gods were worshipped, and the Nile flowed as it always had, but now with a distinct Kushite flair. Yet, beneath the surface of this cultural exchange lay a tension that was as palpable as the desert heat. The Egyptians weren't always thrilled with being ruled by what they saw as a foreign dynasty, despite the Kushites' best efforts to blend in. And let's not forget about the economy. The Kushite control of Egypt meant control of its wealth and resources. This was a time when the Nile was not just a river, but the lifeblood of an empire. It was the superhighway of the ancient world, and Kush was now in the driver's seat. The trade in grain, papyrus, and luxury goods flowed south to Napata and beyond, enriching the kingdom and cementing its status as a dominant power. But Pi's conquest was more than just a grab for power and wealth. It was a statement. The Kushites were not just players on the sidelines of history. They were rewriting the script. By taking on Egypt and winning, Pi was declaring that Kush was an empire not to be trifled with. It was a bold move, a gamble that paid off in spades, yet it was also a reminder of the delicate balance of power in the ancient world. And while Pi was the face of this conquest, he was backed by a kingdom that had built its strength on trade, innovation, and a keen understanding of the world around them. In the end, Pi left a legacy that would resonate for generations. His conquest was a turning point, not just for Kush, but for the entire region. It was a time of change, shifting alliances and new opportunities. The kingdom of Kush was no longer just a footnote. It was headline news. And as the sun set on Pi's reign, the kingdom continued to thrive, its story far from over. There were more chapters to be written, more tales of conquest, trade, and cultural exchange. But for now, the legacy of Pi and his audacious conquest of Egypt stands as a testament to the power and ambition of the kingdom of Kush. As the sun set on Pi's reign, it cast long shadows over a kingdom that was just beginning to flex its architectural muscles in ways that would leave even the Egyptians nodding in grudging respect. Enter the stage, Merere, the new capital of the Kushite kingdom after Napata. It was here that the Kushites decided to leave their mark, quite literally, on the landscape with a series of pyramids that might have had their northern neighbors doing a double take. Now, let's get this straight. The pyramids of Merere aren't some knockoff designer bags you'd find on the street corner. No, these were the real deal, albeit with a twist. While the Egyptian pyramids are the architectural equivalent of a luxury skyscraper, The ones at Meroe are more like a boutique hotel, smaller, yes, but with an undeniably distinct style. The Kushite version of these iconic structures was steeper and narrower, standing at a modest 20 to 30 meters high. They're like the rebellious teenagers of the pyramid family, refusing to conform to the towering heights of their Egyptian counterparts. Here's where the myth-busting kicks in. Contrary to popular belief, the Kushite pyramids weren't a poor imitation of Egypt's grandeur. Instead, they were a testament to the Kushites' unique flair. They incorporated Egyptian influences, but showcased the creativity and adaptability of the Kushite architects. When life gives you limestone, make a pyramid, but make it your own. Meroe itself wasn't just a city of stones and sand. It was a thriving metropolis that became the heart of Kushite culture and innovation. Located strategically between the Nile and the Atbara River, Meroe was a hub of trade and industry. The ironworks of Meroe were legendary, producing weapons and tools that were the envy of their neighbors. The city's furnaces belched smoke like a dragon with indigestion, turning out iron at a rate that would make even the most industrious blacksmiths of the day look like they were slacking off. But let's not forget the real stars of the Kushite show, the Kandakes, or queens, who wielded power with a grace and authority that would put many a king to shame. These were no mere figureheads. They were rulers in their own right, with a legacy that has echoed down the corridors of history. One of the most famous Kandakes was Ammonionus, who ruled around 40 BCE and famously went toe-to-toe with the Roman Empire. Yes, you heard that right. The Romans, those toga-clad conquerors of the ancient world, met their match in this formidable queen. Ammonionus led her troops into battle against the Romans, and while the details of the conflict are a bit murky, ancient historians weren't exactly known for their accuracy. The outcome was clear. Ammonionus managed to negotiate a peace treaty on favorable terms. It's as if she looked the Roman Empire in the eye and said, "Not today, Caesar." Her triumph was immortalized in the inscription on a stela, a sort of ancient press release that boasted of her victories and her divine favor. The Kandakes weren't just warriors. They were also patrons of the arts, religion, and architecture. Their influence is evident in the temples and monuments of Meroe, which were often dedicated to the gods and goddesses of both Kush and Egypt. The Ammon temple at Narka, for instance, is adorned with reliefs that depict the queens as divine intermediaries, bridging the earthly and the celestial with a confidence that would make even the most seasoned diplomat blush. But here's a nugget of truth that often gets lost in the romanticized tales. While the Kandakes wielded considerable power, their reigns were not without challenges. They had to navigate a political landscape as treacherous as the Nile's cataracts, dealing with internal dissent, external threats, and the occasional Roman incursion. Yet they did so with a shrewdness that has left historians both baffled and impressed. The role of women in Kushite society was more than just a footnote. It was a headline. The Kandakes were living proof that women could rule, lead armies, and broker peace with the best of them. This wasn't some ancient anomaly. It was a testament to the progressive nature of Kushite society. In a world where gender roles were often as rigid as a pharaoh's tomb, the kingdom of Kush was a breath of fresh air, a reminder that history is full of surprises. As we dig deeper into the sands of Meroe, it becomes clear that the cultural achievements of Kush were as diverse as they were impactful. This wasn't just a civilization of warriors and architects. It was a melting pot of artistic expression, religious devotion, and political innovation. The Kushites borrowed from their Egyptian neighbors, but infused their creations with a distinctly African spirit. They celebrated their gods with the same fervor as their northern counterparts, but did so with rituals and ceremonies that were uniquely their own. In many ways, the kingdom of Kush was a cultural bridge between Egypt and the wider African continent. It was a place where ideas flowed as freely as the Nile, where the exchange of goods was matched by the exchange of philosophies and beliefs. The Kushites were not just passive recipients of external influences, they were active participants in the cultural dialogue of the ancient world. And so, as the sun rises on this vibrant chapter of history, we find ourselves standing in awe of a civilization that was as complex as the intricate hieroglyphs that adorned its temples. The kingdom of Kush was more than just a blip on the historical radar. It was a beacon of African ingenuity and resilience. It was a place where queens ruled with authority, where pyramids rose against the desert sky, and where the echoes of its achievements continue to resonate through the ages. But hold onto your hats, because the story of Kush is far from over. There are more tales to tell, more myths to debunk, and more discoveries to be made in the shifting sands of time. As we journey further into this forgotten empire, we'll uncover the secrets of its decline, the legacy it left behind, and the lessons it holds for us today. So, stay tuned, because the best is yet to come. As we peel back the layers of time from the grand tapestry of the Kushite story, we find ourselves at the precipice of a period that history often glosses over, a time when the mighty kingdom of Kush began to unravel like a poorly knit sweater. The decline of this once thriving civilization is a cocktail of external pressures, self-inflicted wounds, and the whims of Mother Nature herself. It's a tale as old as time, yet as fresh as tomorrow's headlines, a cautionary story of power, ambition, and the inevitable march of decline. Let's kick things off with the Romans, those toga-wearing titans who had already conquered half the known world by the 1st century BCE. The Romans looked southward, and what they saw was a bountiful land ripe for the picking. To them, Kush was like a glittering prize waiting to be claimed, filled with resources that could fill Roman coffers faster than you could say, Veni, Vidi, Vici. But the Kushites, not ones to back down from a good fight, met them head-on. However, by the 1st century CE, Roman incursions had become a recurring nightmare for the Kushites, and these invasions tested even the most stalwart of their defenses. The Romans, with their legions and logistics that would make even a modern general weep with envy, weren't just a fleeting threat. They were a persistent force, a constant reminder that the world was changing, and not in Kush's favor. The Romans launched their campaigns with the precision of a well-oiled machine, and while they never fully subdued the Kushites, their repeated skirmishes chipped away at the kingdom's resources and morale. Imagine trying to hold back the tide with a bucket. Kush was doing just that, and the bucket was starting to spring leaks. As if the Romans weren't enough to deal with, the kingdom of Kush also faced pressure from the kingdom of Axum, an emerging power to the southeast in what is now modern-day Ethiopia. By the 3rd century CE, Axum was flexing its own muscles, and the Kushites found themselves caught between a rock and a hard place, two expanding empires that had a knack for gobbling up smaller territories like a hungry dog with a bone. Axum's rise marked the beginning of the end for Kush, as they slowly lost control over their once vast trade networks and resources. The Axumites weren't just interested in land. They wanted control of the lucrative trade routes that had been the lifeblood of Kush's economy for centuries. It was a classic case of out with the old, in with the new, and the Kushites were finding themselves on the wrong side of history. But let's not lay all the blame at the feet of external forces. Internally, the kingdom of Kush was dealing with its own set of issues that would make any ruler's hair turn grey. Political instability and succession disputes created a shaky foundation for governance. The central authority weakened as provincial governors and local leaders began to assert more autonomy, leading to a fragmented political landscape. It was like trying to herd cats in a thunderstorm, chaotic, unpredictable, and ultimately futile. Then there was the small matter of climate change. Yes, even in ancient times, climate played a pivotal role in shaping human history. The region experienced significant changes in rainfall patterns, leading to droughts that would have made even the most optimistic Kushite farmer despair. The once fertile lands that hugged the Nile were becoming less bountiful, and agricultural output plummeted. This was more than just a bad harvest. It was an existential threat to a kingdom that had long relied on the Nile's bounty to sustain its people and fuel its economy. Resource depletion, too, took its toll. The mines that had once produced gold and iron with such abundance were beginning to run dry. The Kushites, who had built their power on the wealth of these resources, now found themselves scrambling to maintain their economic standing. It was as if the kingdom had been living on a credit card, and the bill had finally come due. The decline of the kingdom of Kush is a stark reminder of the fragility of empires. No matter how mighty, every empire is subject to the whims of fate, the unpredictability of climate, and the relentless march of history. It's a cycle as inevitable as the changing of the seasons: rise, flourish, decline, and fall. The kingdom of Kush, with all its splendor and achievements, was no exception. Yet, despite the gloom and doom, the story of Kush's decline is not without its moments of resilience and ingenuity. Even as their kingdom faltered, the Kushites continued to innovate and adapt. They forged alliances, restructured their trade networks, and sought new ways to sustain their society. It was a testament to their enduring spirit, a refusal to go gently into that good night. In the end, the kingdom of Kush may have been eclipsed by the empires that followed, but its legacy lives on. The stories of its kings and queens, its warriors and builders, continue to inspire and captivate. The echoes of Kush can still be heard in the sands of Sudan, a whisper of a once great civilization that defied the odds and left an indelible mark on history. As we leave the kingdom of Kush behind in this chapter, we prepare to explore the final act of this epic saga. There are still more tales to uncover, more myths to challenge, and more lessons to learn. So stay tuned, because the journey is far from over, and the best is yet to come. And so, as we turn the final page of the Kushite saga, we mustn't let the dust settle just yet. The kingdom of Kush, though it may have faded from the grand stage of empires, left behind a legacy that's as enduring as the Sahara sands. Picture this. The echoes of Kush can still be felt in the cultural, political, and economic tapestry of Africa and beyond. We're talking about an empire that once spanned over 500 kilometers along the Nile, a stretch that could rival the length of Italy. Now, why isn't Kush a household name like Egypt or Rome? Well, it seems history has a knack for spotlighting the loudest players, those who left behind flashy monuments or were handy with a chisel and some papyrus. Kush, on the other hand, was all about understated elegance, more indie film than Hollywood blockbuster. But this isn't just an oversight. It's a reflection of the narratives that have been favored over time. Historians, for centuries, have been guilty of playing favorites, often sidelining African civilizations in the grand narrative. It's high time we dust off the archives and give Kush its due. Let's bust a few myths while we're here. One popular misconception is that Kush was just a cultural copycat of Egypt, a junior partner in a Nile-based buddy system. The truth is more nuanced. While Kush did borrow elements from its northern neighbor, religious practices, architectural styles, and even the odd hieroglyphic flourish, these were customized to fit the local vibe. It's like seeing a local band cover the Beatles, but with a unique twist that makes you realize the song's potential anew. So what did Kush leave us? For starters, those pyramids at Merare, over 200 of them, are a testament to Kushite architectural ingenuity and their penchant for putting their own spin on things. Then there's the economy. Kush was the Amazon of its day, a bustling hub of trade routes connecting sub-Saharan Africa with the Mediterranean and beyond, dealing in everything from ivory and gold to exotic animals. This wasn't just commerce. It was cultural exchange at its finest, a prehistoric prototype of globalization. Kushite influence, particularly during the Napatan and Meroitic periods, also contributed significantly to the cultural melting pot that was ancient Egypt. The Kushite kings, yes, those bold enough to rule over Egypt itself, brought with them a fresh perspective, one that would leave an indelible mark on Egyptian art, politics, and society. Think of them as cultural ambassadors with a penchant for shaking things up. And let's not forget the political ingenuity of the Kandaks, those formidable queens who wielded power with the grace of a lioness and the strategic acumen of a chess grandmaster. Their reigns highlight the role of women in Kushite society, challenging the male-dominated narrative that history often peddles. In modern terms, they were the glass-ceiling shatterers of their day, proving that leadership wasn't just a man's game. But here's the kicker. The decline of Kush also offers a sobering lesson for today. Their story is a cautionary tale of environmental degradation, resource mismanagement, and the perils of over-reliance on trade networks. Sound familiar? It's a mirror held up to our modern world, a reminder that history, if ignored, has a way of repeating itself. The Kushites faced climate change long before it was a dinner-party conversation starter, and their struggle with shifting rain patterns and depleted resources reads like a script plucked straight from today's headlines. So, what do we take away from all this? The kingdom of Kush was a civilization that thrived on adaptability, cultural synthesis, and economic acumen. Its legacy is a reminder that history isn't just about who built the tallest pyramid or conquered the most lands. It's about the stories that endure, the lessons learned, and the echoes that continue to shape our world. As we stand at the crossroads of history, perhaps we should take a leaf out of Kush's book. Innovate, adapt, and never underestimate the power of a well-placed pyramid. In a world that often feels as turbulent as the Nile in flood season, the story of Kush is a beacon of resilience, a testament to the human spirit's capacity to endure, reinvent, and leave a legacy that resonates long after the final curtain falls. So, next time you find yourself wandering the halls of history, take a moment to listen for the whispers of Kush. They're there, just beneath the surface, waiting to remind us of a time when the heart of Africa was home to an empire that dared to dream big and carve its name into the annals of time. Constantine the Great, a man who clearly understood the importance of a dramatic rebrand, looked out over the ancient city of Byzantium and thought, you know what this place needs? A little Roman makeover. But hold your horses before you imagine him with a toga and a paintbrush. The scene was set in 330 AD, a time when Rome was starting to feel a bit like yesterday's news. Imagine a faded celebrity desperately trying to maintain relevance. Constantine, ever the visionary, decided to give the empire a fresh start by moving its heart to a city that was just a hop, skip, and a sea away from Asia. Enter Constantinople, the new Rome with a killer view and a strategic position that would make any real estate agent swoon. Constantinople wasn't just about aesthetics. It was about power moves. Located at the crossroads of Europe and Asia, this city was the original location, dream come true. You had the Bosphorus Strait, a natural moat and trade superhighway, which meant anyone wanting to play in the Mediterranean or the Black Sea had to pass through Constantine's new front yard. Talk about toll booth potential. Plus, it was far enough from those pesky barbarian invasions that kept knocking on Rome's door like unwanted solicitors. Now, let's talk about Byzantium before it got its Roman glow-up. This wasn't some backwater fishing village. It already had a history dating back to around 657 BC when Greek colonists founded it. But like a middle child, it was often overlooked until Constantine saw its potential. With a strategic location that offered both defense and trade opportunities, Byzantium was a diamond in the rough. Constantine saw that, and in true Roman fashion, decided to carve his name into history by transforming it into something bigger and better. By the time Constantine was done, Constantinople wasn't just a city, it was a statement. Imagine Rome, but with a touch of Eastern flair. In fact, Constantine poured resources into this city like it was an empire on Kickstarter. He commissioned grand structures like the Hagia Irene, a cathedral that would eventually be overshadowed by its more famous sibling, the Hagia Sophia. He also built the Hippodrome, a chariot racing track that could hold up to 100,000 spectators. Think of it as the Super Bowl, but with more horses and fewer commercials. The man himself knew that to create a new Rome, he needed to not just build, but also to entice. So, in a move that would make modern-day city planners nod in approval, he offered tax breaks and land to anyone willing to move to his new capital. It was like an ancient version of Move Here, Get Rich Quick schemes, but with more marble and less internet. This ambitious urban development wasn't just about keeping up with the Joneses. It was about creating a bastion of Christian power, in stark contrast to the pagan Rome he had left behind. Constantine was the first Roman emperor to convert to Christianity, and he wanted his new city to reflect this shift. Constantinople became a city adorned with churches and Christian symbols, signaling to the world that Rome's days of idol worship were drawing to a close. But let's pause for a moment to appreciate the irony here. Constantine, a man who spent much of his early life in the service of the pagan gods, was now shaping his legacy around a faith that would eventually define the empire. He was baptized on his deathbed in 337 AD, a classic last-minute decision that would make any procrastinator proud. As Constantinople rose, it wasn't just the architecture that was getting a facelift. The entire Byzantine Empire, named after the city's original moniker, was becoming a cultural and economic powerhouse. By the 5th century, this city was not only the largest in Europe, but also the wealthiest, thanks to its prime position on the Silk Road and its natural harbor, the Golden Horn. Trade goods flowed like wine at a Roman banquet, bringing in everything from spices and silk to ideas and innovations. Yet, despite all the grandeur and strategic brilliance, Constantinople was not invincible. The city would face sieges, riots, and political machinations that would make Game of Thrones look like a tea party. But in those early days, with Constantine at the helm, the vision was clear. This was a city built to last, a new Rome that would carry the torch of the empire for 1,000 years. Constantine's decision to move the capital was not without its detractors. Some Romans scoffed at the idea of abandoning their ancient city, a place steeped in tradition and imperial history. After all, Rome was the eternal city, not some fly-by-night startup. But Constantine wasn't about to let the naysayers dampen his resolve. He was a man on a mission, and that mission was to ensure the survival of the empire, even if it meant shaking things up. In the end, Constantinople was more than just a capital. It was the embodiment of Constantine's legacy. A city that blended the best of East and West, it was a testament to the emperor's foresight and ambition. By the time of his death, the city was well on its way to becoming the beating heart of an empire that would endure for centuries. And while Rome would eventually fall to the barbarians in 476 AD, Constantinople stood strong, a beacon of culture and civilization in an increasingly chaotic world. So, let's raise a metaphorical glass to Constantine, the emperor who dared to dream big and bet on Byzantium. His vision transformed an ancient Greek settlement into a metropolis that would become the envy of the world. In the process, he laid the foundations for an empire that would carry the flame of Rome into the medieval era, proving that sometimes all it takes to change the world is a little vision, a lot of marble, and a prime piece of real estate. But let's not get too comfortable basking in Constantine's urban triumph, because, like any good historical drama, the Byzantine story was just getting started. Enter Justinian I, a man who believed that if you weren't building a monument, were you even ruling? This emperor, reigning from 527 to 565 AD, was a visionary, an architect of dreams. And let's not forget, the husband of Theodora, a former actress whose life could inspire a whole season of any modern-day reality show. Together, these two were the Byzantine Empire's power couple, blending imperial ambition with an eye for drama that would make any Hollywood producer envious. First on Justinian's bucket list was the Hagia Sophia, the architectural mic drop of the ancient world. When the previous church on that site was burnt down during the Nika riots of 532 AD, Justinian seized the opportunity to build something that would make even the guards glance downward. This was not just a building, it was his legacy. Completed in 537 AD, the Hagia Sophia was a marvel of engineering, with a dome that seemed to float like a celestial pancake. It took just 5 years to complete, a construction speed that would make even modern contractors raise an eyebrow. The cost: a cool 320,000 pounds of gold, which, for context, could buy you a small kingdom or a lifetime supply of avocado toast. But what was a little gold between friends, or in this case, an emperor and his subjects? Justinian wanted this to be a monument to his reign, a beacon of orthodox Christianity, and he wasn't about to skimp on the details. The interiors dazzled with mosaics and marble, a fitting tribute to divine glory and imperial vanity. While Justinian was busy turning Constantinople into a cityscape of domes and minarets, he was also rewriting the rulebook. Enter the Corpus Juris Civilis, or the body of civil law, which sounds a lot fancier in Latin. Compiled between 529 and 534 AD, these legal reforms were Justinian's bid to streamline and update Roman law, which had become a tad bloated over the centuries. Think of it as the ultimate legal Marie Kondo session, where only the laws that sparked joy, or at least administrative efficiency, were kept. This legal overhaul wasn't just a vanity project. It was a cornerstone for future European legal systems, influencing everything from the Napoleonic Code to modern civil law traditions. Justinian's reforms were about creating order out of chaos, proving that a well-organized legal system was as essential to an empire as a well-stocked treasury. Speaking of treasuries, Justinian had a knack for ambitious military campaigns that left his coffers sounding a bit echoey. His goal was nothing less than the restoration of the Roman Empire's former glory, which meant expensive wars in Italy, North Africa, and beyond. These weren't weekend skirmishes. They were full-blown campaigns that required every denarius he could muster. Led by his star general, Belisarius, Justinian managed to reclaim large swaths of the Western Empire, including the city of Rome itself. It was a bold move that temporarily expanded the Byzantine borders, but strained the empire's resources to their limits. But let's not gloss over the drama. Procopius, the empire's chief historian, and quite possibly the world's first tabloid writer, penned the secret history, a salacious tell-all that painted Justinian and Theodora in less than flattering light. According to Procopius, Justinian was a demon in human form, literally. The man had a flair for hyperbole that would make today's gossip columnists envious, but beneath the sensationalism lay a kernel of truth. Justinian was a complex figure whose grand ambitions often came with a hefty price tag. Theodora, too, didn't escape Procopius's pen unscathed. She was portrayed as a manipulative power behind the throne, a woman whose rise from humble beginnings to empress was nothing short of extraordinary. While Procopius's account was undoubtedly colored by personal vendettas, it does highlight the unique position Theodora held. As co-ruler, she wielded significant influence, particularly in religious and social matters, championing causes like women's rights and anti-trafficking laws. Theodora's legacy was as much about challenging societal norms as it was about navigating court intrigues with finesse. Yet, amidst the splendor and scandal, Justinian's reign also faced its fair share of calamities. The plague of Justinian, hitting in 541 AD, was a pandemic that swept through the empire with the ruthless efficiency of a tax collector, killing millions and severely impacting the economy. It was a grim reminder that not even the most powerful emperors could control nature's wrath. Despite these trials, Justinian's vision for the Byzantine Empire was transformative. He wasn't just building an empire, he was crafting a legacy that would echo through history. His reign was a grand tapestry of triumph and tragedy, woven together with threads of ambition and resilience. So, as we leave this chapter open for the next installment, remember, Justinian's era was not just about the past glory of Rome, but about shaping a future that would endure long after the last stone was laid in the Hagia Sophia. And like any good story, there's always more to uncover. Stay tuned. Yet, as we leave Justinian's grand tapestry of ambition behind, let's pivot to the next chapter in our Byzantine saga, the era of iconoclasm, a period that might as well have been the empire's awkward teenage years. Picture a time when smashing religious images was the medieval equivalent of rebelling by getting a tattoo your parents would definitely not approve of. It was a time brimming with more family drama than your average reality TV show, complete with power struggles, theological debates, and enough economic fallout to give any treasurer a migraine. The year was 726 AD, and the empire was being ruled by Emperor Leo Roman III, known to his friends, well, if he had any, as Leo the Isaurian. Now, Leo wasn't just some emperor twiddling his thumbs on the Byzantine throne. He was a man with a mission. Observing the empire's struggles, he came to the conclusion that the empire's woes were due to divine displeasure over the veneration of icons. Yes, folks, the emperor decided that all those religious images were the reason for the empire's problems, like a medieval version of blaming Mercury, retrograde for your life's hiccups. Thus began the iconoclastic controversy, a fancy term for icon smashing that sounds more like a rock band than a theological dispute. Leo's edict was clear: no more icons. The empire's churches, which were adorned with these images, suddenly found themselves at the center of a heated debate. Was this a purging of idolatry, or just the emperor's way of flexing his theological muscles? Either way, it was a move that divided the empire like a poorly timed political tweet. Now, before you start thinking Leo was just a party pooper for religious art enthusiasts, let's dive into the economic ripples of this iconoclastic wave. The removal of icons didn't just affect the spiritual fabric of the empire, it also hit the economy where it hurt. Artisans who specialized in creating these religious images suddenly found their skills about as useful as a chocolate teapot. Imagine being a painter with no walls left to paint. It was a harsh reality that left many craftsmen searching for new vocations, or, in some cases, new patrons outside the empire's borders. But the economic impact was just the tip of the iceberg. This theological tug-of-war over icons was more than just a religious debate. It was a power struggle wrapped in a holy robe. The church versus the state, the emperor versus the patriarch, each vying for the upper hand in a game that had more twists than a Byzantine mosaic. Theologians and scholars were dragged into the fray, each wielding scripture like a lawyer brandishing case law, trying to prove once and for all whether the icons were sacred or sacrilegious. And then there was the family drama. Leo's son, Constantine V, took the iconoclastic torch from his father and ran with it like it was an Olympic relay. Constantine was not just a supporter of iconoclasm, he was its champion, turning the empire's iconoclastic policies up to 11. It's said that his nickname, Carpronymus, was a result of a rather unfortunate incident at his baptism involving the font. One can only imagine the kind of awkward family dinners that might have inspired. Under Constantine's rule, the iconoclastic policies intensified, leading to the persecution of iconophiles, those who supported the veneration of icons. This wasn't just a friendly debate over dinner, it was a full-on purge of those who dared to oppose him. Monasteries, which had become strongholds of iconophile sentiment, were particularly targeted. Monks were persecuted, exiled, or forced into hiding, and monastic lands were confiscated, adding yet another layer of economic upheaval to an already volatile situation. Amidst this chaos, the Byzantine economy was a roller coaster of ups and downs. The confiscation of monastic lands was a double-edged sword. On one hand, it provided the state with much-needed resources. On the other, it disrupted the rural economy and alienated a significant portion of the populace. It was the kind of economic balancing act that would make any modern economist's head spin. But alas, like any good historical drama, the iconoclast period wasn't without its plot twists. Enter Empress Irene, the first woman to rule the Byzantine Empire in her own right. If the story of iconoclasm needed a plot twist, Irene delivered it with all the flair of a seasoned actress stepping into the spotlight. Her reign, beginning in 797 AD, marked a dramatic shift as she sought to restore the veneration of icons. Her motivations were as much about consolidating power as they were about religious conviction. After all, nothing says, "I'm in charge now," quite like reversing the policies of your predecessors and convening the Second Council of Nicaea in 787 AD to make it official. Irene's restoration of icons not only breathed new life into Byzantine art, but it also had profound economic implications. Artisans who had been sidelined during the iconoclastic period were suddenly back in demand, as churches and patrons scrambled to replace the imagery that had been destroyed. It was an artistic renaissance that reinvigorated the economy and brought a sense of continuity to the Byzantine cultural landscape. Yet, Irene's reign was not without its challenges. In a world dominated by men, her position as empress was precarious, and political intrigue was never far from the surface. Her vision for the empire was ambitious, but it was often hampered by factions within the court that saw her as a usurper rather than a legitimate ruler. Her reign was a tightrope walk between power and perception, a constant struggle to maintain her authority in a world that wasn't quite ready for a woman at the helm. As the dust settled on the iconoclastic controversy, the Byzantine Empire found itself at a crossroads. The theological debates had left deep scars, both socially and economically, but they had also paved the way for a renewed sense of identity. The empire was no longer just a continuation of Roman tradition. It was a unique civilization with its own artistic and cultural legacy. The restoration of icons was not just about religious images. It was about restoring the soul of Byzantium, a civilization that, despite its internal struggles, continued to be a beacon of culture and innovation in the medieval world. So, as we leave this chapter hanging like a Byzantine tapestry in the wind, let's remember the lessons of iconoclasm. That power, like art, is often in the eye of the beholder, and that even the most heated debates can lead to unexpected renewal. But don't get too comfortable just yet. The Byzantine story has plenty more twists and turns to come. Stay tuned for the next installment, where we'll delve into the empire's further adventures in survival, intrigue, and the ever-present quest for glory. As the Byzantine Empire picked up the pieces from its theological roller coaster ride, it found itself staring down the barrel of yet another storm, this time from the west. If the iconoclast controversy was a religious soap opera, the Crusades were the equivalent of an action-packed blockbuster, complete with knights, swords, and a plot twist that no one saw coming. The First Crusade kicked off in 1096, ostensibly to reclaim the Holy Land from the Seljuk Turks. But as is often the case in history, the reality was a bit more nuanced. Sure, there were religious motivations, but let's not ignore the sweet allure of land, wealth, and power that came along for the ride. The Byzantines, under Emperor Alexios I Komnenos, watched this unfolding spectacle with a mix of hope and apprehension. On one hand, the idea of Western knights taking on the Seljuks, who had been a thorn in Byzantium's side since the Battle of Manzikert in 1071, was appealing. On the other hand, inviting a bunch of heavily armed, zealous knights into one's backyard was a bit like inviting a bunch of college students to a wine-tasting party. Sure, it might start well, but things could quickly get out of hand. Alexios, ever the pragmatic ruler, decided to make the best of a chaotic situation. He played the role of the gracious host, offering supplies and guidance to the Crusaders in exchange for fealty and the promise of returned territories. It was a classic case of keep your friends close and your armed, unpredictable guests closer. For a while, it worked. The First Crusade did indeed recapture Jerusalem in 1099, and the Byzantine Empire regained some of its lost territories in Anatolia. But as any seasoned diplomat could tell you, alliances are as fickle as the tides. Fast forward to the Fourth Crusade, and things took a decidedly darker turn. By this point, the original mission of the Crusades, to reclaim the Holy Land, had morphed into something entirely different. With Venice as the financial backer, the Crusaders found themselves in debt. The Venetians, who were more interested in trade routes than holy relics, saw an opportunity to redirect the crusade towards a more lucrative target, Constantinople itself. Imagine the horror when your guests decide that your house is the prize they were after all along. In 1204, the Fourth Crusade reached its infamous climax. The Crusaders, fueled by a mix of greed, zeal, and perhaps a touch of opportunism, sacked Constantinople in a display of medieval chaos that would make even the most raucous frat party seem tame. The city was pillaged, its treasures looted, and its monuments desecrated. Priceless relics were carted off to Europe, where they would adorn cathedrals and private collections, a stark reminder of Constantinople's fall from grace. The economic impact was catastrophic. What was once the beating heart of Byzantine commerce found itself stripped of its wealth, a shadow of its former glory. Politically, the sack of Constantinople was a seismic shift. The Byzantine Empire was fragmented, its authority shattered like a porcelain vase in the hands of an overzealous juggler. The Latin Empire was established in the city, while Byzantine successors scrambled to regroup in outlying territories like Nicaea and Epirus. The once great empire was now a patchwork of squabbling states, each vying for power and legitimacy. The Byzantine emperors, who once ruled from the grand palaces of Constantinople, were now exiles in their own land, forced to navigate a treacherous landscape of shifting alliances and rival claims. Economically, the sack dealt a blow from which Byzantium would never fully recover. The city's wealth had fueled its economy and its ability to project power, and its loss left the empire economically and militarily weakened. The once bustling trade routes that had brought prosperity to Constantinople were disrupted. The empire's ability to levy taxes and maintain its infrastructure was severely compromised. The Byzantine economy, which had been the envy of the medieval world, now struggled to retain even a semblance of its former prosperity. The Crusades, often romanticized as noble quests for Christian unity, laid bare the complexities of medieval politics and the ever-present lure of wealth and power. The Fourth Crusade, in particular, shattered any illusions of noble intent, exposing the harsh reality of political ambition and economic self-interest. Yet, amidst the ruins of Constantinople, the Byzantine spirit endured. The empire, though battered and bruised, was not yet defeated. It would take more than a sack to extinguish the flame that had burned for nearly 1,000 years. In the aftermath, the Byzantine Empire faced the daunting task of rebuilding not just its city, but its identity. The Latin Empire's presence in Constantinople was a constant reminder of what had been lost, but it also spurred a fierce determination among the Byzantines to reclaim their heritage. In 1261, the Empire of Nicaea, under Michael Roman VIII Palaiologos, succeeded in retaking Constantinople from the Latins, marking a triumphant return to the city that had been their heart and soul. But the Byzantines returned to a city that had fundamentally changed. The infrastructure was in disrepair, the population had dwindled, and the once thriving markets were shadows of their former selves. The empire's resources were stretched thin, and the strategic advantage that Constantinople once held was now a double-edged sword. The city's location, which had been a boon for trade, now made it a target for ambitious powers from both east and west. The Byzantine Empire's revival was a testament to its resilience, but it was also a reminder of the challenges that lay ahead. The empire's borders were constantly tested by the rising powers of the Ottomans in the east and the resurgent Western European states. The political landscape of the medieval world was shifting, and the Byzantines found themselves caught in the crossfire of competing interests. Economically, the empire struggled to regain its footing. The loss of Constantinople's wealth had left a lasting impact, and the empire's ability to project power and influence was severely diminished. Trade, once the lifeblood of the Byzantine economy, was slow to recover, and the empire's reliance on mercenary soldiers and foreign loans added to its financial burdens. The Byzantine economy, once a beacon of prosperity, was now a delicate balancing act, teetering on the edge of collapse. Yet, despite these challenges, the Byzantines persevered. Their cultural and intellectual legacy continued to inspire, leaving an indelible mark on the medieval world. The empire's scholars preserved and transmitted classical knowledge, ensuring that the wisdom of ancient Greece and Rome would not be lost to the sands of time. The Byzantines, though diminished in power, continued to be a cultural bridge between East and West, a testament to their enduring influence. So here we stand, at the cusp of Byzantium's final chapters. The empire, though battered by crusades and internal strife, remained a symbol of resilience and adaptability. Its story, like all great sagas, is one of triumph and tragedy, of ambition and survival. As we prepare to delve further into the Byzantine twilight, remember that history is never a straight line. It's a tapestry woven with the threads of human ambition, folly, and perseverance. Stay tuned, because the Byzantine tale is far from over. As the Byzantine Empire stood on the precipice of history's exit ramp, it faced a world that had changed faster than a smartphone's operating system. While once the glittering jewel of Christendom, by the 14th century, Byzantium had become a relic of its former self. Like an old software version, everyone forgot to update. The empire was now a shadow, shrunken to a city-state, hugging the shores of the Bosphorus, surrounded by burgeoning Ottoman forces who were less into strategic alliances and more into conquest. The Byzantine Empire's decline was less a sudden collapse and more of a slow fade, like a once popular TV show that just couldn't find its plot. By the time the Ottomans came knocking, the Byzantine economy was about as robust as a paper umbrella in a monsoon. The treasury was perpetually empty, and the empire relied on mercenaries who were more like fair-weather friends, loyal only as long as the coin flowed. And let's not forget the Byzantine reliance on Italian city-states like Venice and Genoa, whose help was often a Trojan horse of self-interest. Picture this. You hire a guard to protect your house, but he's more interested in your silverware than your safety. Politically, the Byzantine Empire was a family drama that made Shakespeare look like a sitcom. Internal power struggles and intrigue were par for the course, with emperors coming and going faster than you could say Byzantine bureaucracy. The empire's leadership was often more concerned with personal vendettas than with the looming Ottoman threat. While the sultans of the Ottoman Empire were busy building an empire with IKEA-like efficiency, the Byzantine emperors were still trying to figure out who got the last piece of baklava. Speaking of the Ottomans, let's talk about a little event known as the Fall of Constantinople in 1453. Sultan Mehmed Roman II, a man who clearly understood the importance of a grand entrance, set his sights on the city with the determination of a kid eyeing the last cookie in the jar. His army of around 80,000 soldiers dwarfed the city's defenders, who numbered barely 7,000. But it wasn't just the numbers game that sealed Constantinople's fate. It was the Ottomans' use of gunpowder and cannon technology that turned the tide. The giant cannon, or bombard, was a medieval game-changer. reducing the city's once impregnable Theodosian walls to rubble faster than you could say, catapult. Economically, the siege of 1453 was the final nail in Byzantium's coffin. The city that had once been a thriving hub of trade and culture was now a ghost town, its streets echoing with the sounds of a bygone era. The fall of Constantinople marked not just the end of an empire, but the shift of economic power to the west, paving the way for the age of exploration. As the Ottomans took control, they transformed the city into Istanbul, bridging east and west in a new era of trade and cultural exchange, making Constantinople's fall a pivot rather than a pause in the grand narrative. But let's pause to dissect the myth versus reality of Byzantium's legacy. For centuries, the Byzantine Empire was romanticized as the last bastion of Roman glory, a civilization that carried the torch of antiquity through the dark medieval ages. This narrative is appealing, like a comforting blanket on a cold night, but it's only part of the story. The reality was that Byzantium was more of a cultural chameleon, adapting and evolving over the centuries. It was less about preserving Rome's legacy and more about creating its own, a unique blend of Greek, Roman, Christian, and Eastern influences that left an indelible mark on history. Byzantium's influence on the Renaissance is a case in point. When scholars fled the fallen city, they carried with them manuscripts and knowledge that would ignite intellectual fervor in the West. The Renaissance, often seen as a rebirth of classical knowledge, had Byzantium's fingerprints all over it. The empire may have crumbled, but its cultural capital continued to shape the world long after its political demise. So, was Byzantium the last bastion of Rome, or just a very long sequel with diminishing returns? Perhaps it was both, a testament to the resilience and adaptability of a civilization that refused to fade quietly into the annals of history. Its legacy is a reminder that empires are not just defined by their borders, but by the ideas and innovations they leave behind. Byzantium's story is one of endurance against the odds, a saga of ambition and survival that resonates even today. As we wrap up this historical journey, it's clear that Byzantium was more than just an empire. It was a bridge between worlds, a crucible of cultures, and a testament to the enduring power of human ingenuity. Its story is a reminder that history is not just a series of dates and events, but a tapestry woven from the threads of human experience. So, as you drift off into the land of dreams, remember the tale of Byzantium, the empire that refused to be forgotten, leaving a legacy as rich and complex as the mosaics that once adorned its walls. As dawn's first light sneaks through the narrow, stained-glass windows, you find yourself waking up not in the comforting hum of a modern hospital wing, but in the echoing silence of a medieval infirmary. Surprise! You're in a place that looks more like a set from a medieval drama than a place of healing. The air is thick with the scent of incense, lavender, and let's be honest, the less than pleasant aroma of unwashed humanity. Welcome to the medieval hospital, where the architecture screams holy sanctuary rather than cutting-edge medical center. These hospitals were run by the church, and their design reflects that priority loud and clear. Think vaulted ceilings, stone walls, and a layout that's more monastery than medical facility. Here, the term hospital was derived from the Latin hasps, meaning guest or host, rather than heal or cure. You're more a guest of divine mercy than a patient in recovery. Let's tackle the elephant in the room, medical innovation. Spoiler alert, it wasn't a thing. While modern hospitals are bustling with professionals in white coats discussing the latest in medical technology, medieval hospitals were more about spiritual healing and charity. In fact, they were institutions where the sick, poor, and sometimes even travelers found shelter and care. But if you're expecting a team of doctors ready to diagnose and treat, well, that's a plot twist medieval hospitals didn't offer. The staff here weren't exactly the Grey's Anatomy ensemble you might hope for. Instead, you'd find monks and nuns, people whose training involved more prayer books than medical textbooks. These were individuals who believed that spiritual well-being was the first step toward physical health. And why not? When you've got more faith than medicine, you work with what you've got. The monks and nuns provided care, but it was more about comfort and less about curing. No medieval hospital would be complete without a dash of superstitious spice. Medical training was limited, to put it mildly. You see, the church had a bit of a monopoly on education, and medicine was no exception. Most of what passed for medical knowledge was rooted in ancient texts by the likes of Hippocrates and Galen. These guys were good, but the problem was that much of their work had been lost, misunderstood, or misapplied over the centuries. So the staff leaned heavily on the power of prayer, holy relics, and the occasional herbal remedy. One of the more famous institutions was the Hôtel Dieu in Paris, established around 651 AD. It was the oldest hospital in the city, run by the Augustinians. The place was less about individual patient care and more of a communal experience. Beds were shared. Yes, shared. By patients, often 3 to a bed. Talk about getting cozy with your fellow man. Privacy wasn't exactly a thing, and personal space was as mythical as dragons. Speaking of dragons, let's slay the myth of the romantic medieval hospital. It's tempting to imagine these places as quaint, charming spots where gentle caregivers nursed you back to health with love and leeches. But the reality was far from a medieval Pinterest board. The focus was on the soul over the body, and mortality rates were high. If you walked in with a fever, chances were you weren't walking out. In fact, hospitals were sometimes referred to as waiting rooms for death. The medieval hospital was a reflection of its time, a place where the church's influence was as pervasive as the damp chill in the air. Care was charitable, not clinical. Patients were often at the mercy of divine intervention more than anything else. The idea was to prepare the soul for the afterlife, because, let's face it, medieval medicine often had one foot in the grave. In this setting, the role of religious care over actual health care can't be overstated. The church saw the body as a vessel for the soul, and illness was sometimes seen as a test of faith. Healing was as much about cleansing the spirit as it was about treating the body. The line between healthcare and holy care was blurrier than a medieval manuscript in a candlelit scriptorium. As you lie there, contemplating your existence in this austere environment, you realize the medieval hospital is a world away from the sterile, technology-driven centers we know today. Here, the battle against disease was fought with faith, not pharmaceuticals. You might not last a day in this place, but you're certainly getting a crash course in the history of healthcare. In this medieval morning, you're not just a patient. You're part of a centuries-old tradition where charity, faith, and rudimentary medicine collide in a stone-walled sanctuary. It's a place where the church's charitable mission was as vital as the care it provided, and where the past and present intertwine like the ivy clinging to the hospital's ancient walls. As you lie there, contemplating your existence in this austere environment, your stomach growls in rebellion, reminding you that breakfast is just around the corner, or at least whatever passes for breakfast in this medieval setup. Forget eggs Benedict or a smooth latte. The morning menu here is more Survivor, medieval edition, than brunch at Tiffany's. Enter the medieval hospital breakfast, a steaming bowl of gruel and a hunk of stale bread. This isn't the Instagrammable hash breakfast goals you're used to. Instead, it's the kind of meal that leaves you pondering whether the bread or the hospital walls are older. Sure, the fare is humble, but it's packed with carbohydrates, arguably the powerhouses of the medieval diet. And while it might sound like a punishment, for many patients, this was a step up from what they'd get outside those stone walls. Now, let's chew over the economics of this whole setup. These hospitals weren't exactly flush with cash. They ran, for the most part, on the kindness of strangers. Funding was largely dependent on donations from wealthy patrons and the church's coffers. So, when money was tight, and it often was, the quality of care went south faster than a medieval pilgrim on a holy quest. Picture it, a feast or famine financial model where the food was generally more famine than feast. The hospital's funding, or lack thereof, directly impacted patient care. When donations were plentiful, you might get a few extra spoonfuls of that gruel, or maybe even a splash of broth if you were really lucky. But in leaner times, you might be splitting that stale bread with a fellow patient, and if you were in the wrong place at the wrong time, maybe even with a mouse or two. After all, rodents weren't exactly warded off by the hospital's divine protection plan. Speaking of sharing, let's not forget the cozy sleeping arrangements. Privacy in a medieval hospital was as rare as a modern doctor making house calls. Beds were communal affairs, often shared by 2 or even 3 patients at a time. Imagine crawling into a bed already occupied by 2 other people, all of you with different ailments. It's the original reality show, minus the cameras. The idea of personal space was as foreign as, well, modern medicine. This wasn't just a logistical nightmare, but an economic necessity. Beds were a luxury, and in hospitals where budgets were tighter than a night's chainmail, it was all about maximizing resources. And just like that, you and your bedfellows became unlikely companions in this medieval tableau, united by circumstance and a mutual longing for a cure, or at least a good night's sleep. The scarcity of resources wasn't just limited to beds and breakfast. Everything from clean linens to basic medical supplies was rationed with the frugality of a medieval monk. This scarcity was a reality of life in a world where everything was painstakingly handmade, with no industrial assembly lines to churn out endless supplies. The hospital's supplies were often cobbled together from alms and the occasional benevolent merchant. Let's zoom out for a moment and consider why this setup mattered. The medieval hospital was a microcosm of medieval life itself, resource-scarce, heavily reliant on community support, and driven by a blend of faith and pragmatism. The care provided was less about curing ailments and more about offering respite and spiritual solace. It was a place where the economics of healthcare were dictated not by insurance premiums, but by the generosity of those who held the purse strings. The myth of the medieval hospital as a place of serene healing is a tempting one, but the reality is far more complex and, dare I say, human. It was a space where the lines between life and death were blurred, where the communal experience was as much about survival as it was about salvation. The picture-perfect notion of medieval hospitals is a romanticized myth, one that's about as accurate as a medieval map of the world. In this stone-walled sanctuary, you might not find privacy or luxury, but you do find a testament to the resilience of humanity. People came together in the face of adversity, and if they didn't always conquer their ailments, they at least offered each other companionship and hope. As you sit with your bowl of gruel, contemplating the day ahead, you're participating in a centuries-old tradition of communal care and survival. It's a raw, unvarnished slice of history, where the past and present meet in the simplest of meals and the most basic of comforts. Sure, you might not last long in the medieval hospital without longing for the comforts of the modern world, but you've got to admire the spirit of those who did. It's a testament to the human capacity for endurance, even when faced with a breakfast that leaves much to be desired. And as the day unfolds, you'll find that the lessons of this historical experience are as nourishing as that bowl of gruel, minus the aftertaste. As you sit there contemplating the gruel that barely passes for breakfast, the medieval hospital's daily rhythm is already in full swing around you. And now, it's time to dive headfirst into the bizarre world of medieval medicine that makes modern treatments look like magic. Spoiler, you're going to wish for a time machine by midday. Welcome to the realm of medieval treatment methods, where leeches were not just a gross curiosity, but a go-to medical tool. Yes, these slimy little bloodsuckers were all the rage, touted for their ability to balance the humours. If you're scratching your head about humours, you're not alone. They were the ancient belief that our bodies were governed by 4 fluids: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. The idea was to keep these in balance, but the execution often left much to be desired. Fasten your tunic, because it's about to get messy. Enter bloodletting, the blockbuster hit of medieval healthcare. The logic: too much blood was clearly the culprit behind all sorts of ailments. Got a headache? Must be too much blood in your noggin. Feeling feverish? Excess blood again. The solution: let some of it out. This was done through venesection, fancy word for cutting a vein or using our pal the leech. While today you might get a pill and drink more water from your dark, back then you get a bowlful of your own blood. Talk about DIY healthcare. But let's not dismiss leeches entirely. These little guys were pretty effective at what they did, stopping blood from clotting and keeping wounds clean. In fact, they're still used in some modern medical procedures. Who would have thunk it? Of course, the medieval folks didn't exactly have the science to back their methods. They were more about trial and error, with heavy emphasis on error. And then there were herbal remedies, the medieval pharmacy aisle. From sage to rosemary, these herbs were the unsung heroes of the day, believed to cure everything from the common cold to the plague. Monks and nuns, your makeshift pharmacists, concocted these potions with a mix of faith and whatever they could forage. Some of these remedies actually did the trick, like willow bark for pain relief. Hint, It's the precursor to aspirin. But here's the kicker: hygiene, or the shocking lack thereof. Hand-washing wasn't standard practice, not by a long shot. Germ theory wouldn't grace the medical stage for another few centuries, so cleanliness was more about avoiding visible dirt than evading microscopic germs. Water was often seen as a breeding ground for disease, ironically, so washing wasn't high on the list. The result? A veritable petri dish of potential infections, just waiting to pounce. In a world where cleanliness was next to godliness, and godliness often took precedence, the medieval hospital was a breeding ground for all sorts of nasties. Imagine surgical tools being wiped on aprons, or the same dirty cloth used on multiple patients. If you thought modern clinics were germy, think again. The medieval hospital was a veritable laboratory of contagion. Myths about the efficacy of medieval medicine abound, painting a picture of wise old monks with secret health elixirs. But let's be real, they were often as clueless as they were pious. Medicine was more guesswork than science, and superstition often ruled the day. Astrology was considered a legitimate diagnostic tool, and treatments were sometimes based on the stars rather than symptoms. The zodiac wasn't just for horoscopes, it was for health plans. Feeling a bit under the weather? It might be because Mercury is in retrograde. For all its faults, medieval medicine was a product of its time, a blend of ancient lore and religious belief, seasoned with a dash of desperation. It was healthcare by divine right, where the unknown was often as terrifying as the ailment itself. But don't let that stop you from picturing the romance of it all, the mystical aura of herbal healers, the solemnity of religious rituals, and the shadowy corridors of stone-walled hospitals. Yet, beneath this veneer of romanticism lies the harsh reality. Mortality rates were sky-high, and treatments were as likely to harm as heal. Superstition often outweighed science, with relics and prayers taking precedence over practical medicine. But for all its faults, the medieval hospital was a place where hope was the strongest medicine of all, even if it was often a placebo. As midday approaches, you're starting to regret your choices. You've survived breakfast, but the day's treatments loom ominously. You might be yearning for the antiseptic smell of a modern hospital and the reassuring beeps of medical monitors. Instead, you're in a world where the line between healing and harm is as blurred as a medieval manuscript. This is the medieval hospital experience, a place where the past and present collide in a cacophony of faith, superstition, and the occasional leech. You might not last long in this setting, but you've gained a new appreciation for the strides medicine has made since those stone-walled days. And as you brace for the afternoon, remember, history is a great teacher, even if its lessons are sometimes learned the hard way. As the medieval hospital's solemn afternoon rounds approach, the setting starts to resemble less of a healing sanctuary and more of a social microcosm wrapped in stone and incense. You quickly realize that in these hallowed halls, the pecking order is as rigid as a knight's helmet. Welcome to the world where social hierarchy dictates everything from who gets the comfiest bed to who wields the most influence over your leech quota. Let's start with the heavy hitters. Monks and nuns. These religious caretakers were the backbone of hospital operations, wielding more power than your usual medical intern. Monks, with their flowing robes and solemn expressions, were often in charge of the spiritual affairs, ensuring your soul was well cared for, even if your body was a different story. They doubled as administrators, managing the hospital's meager resources with the kind of frugality that would make a modern accountant proud. Nuns, on the other hand, were the hospital's real MVPs, massive value providers. They were the ones who rolled up their sleeves and got down to the nitty-gritty of caregiving. With a combination of compassion and a no-nonsense attitude, these women were the primary caregivers. And let's be real, they were the ones keeping the place from descending into total chaos. Their training might not have been medical in the modern sense, but they knew their way around a poultice and could whip up herbal remedies with the precision of a medieval Martha Stewart. Now, let's address the hack-and-slash specialists of the time, barber surgeons. These folks were the Swiss Army knives of medieval medicine. Need a haircut, a shave, or a quick amputation? They were your go-to. Their skills in bloodletting and tooth extraction were legendary, though not always for the right reasons. The combination of grooming and surgery seems odd to us now, but back then, it was a package deal. If you think your last haircut was painful, imagine leaving the barber's chair minus an appendage. But why were women often at the forefront of caregiving? This wasn't just a fluke of history. Women were considered naturally suited to the nurturing roles, a perception that was as patronizing as it was pervasive. Their status as caregivers was also a reflection of the limited roles available to them in broader society. With few opportunities for advancement outside the confines of family and religious life, many women found their calling in the quiet heroism of hospital work. In this environment, the idea of a hospital serving as a place of healing takes a backseat to its role as a refuge. Hospitals were essentially medieval safety nets, catching the poor and elderly who had nowhere else to go. Picture it as the original social security program, but with more incense and less bureaucracy. The sick and destitute, the elderly with nowhere else to turn, sought solace within these walls. The focus was on providing a roof and a warm meal, with actual medical treatment being something of a bonus rather than the main attraction. It's important to understand that the medieval hospital was more akin to a community center with a side of spiritual healing than a health-focused institution. The church's charitable mission was to protect and care for the unfortunate souls who drifted through their doors, offering them respite in an otherwise harsh world. If healing happened, it was considered a divine intervention rather than the result of medical expertise. This brings us to the residents who shuffled through these corridors. The patients were often the poorest of the poor, people who couldn't afford the luxury of home care or private physicians. These institutions became sanctuaries for the elderly, the impoverished, and the sick, more hospice than hospital. It's a hard truth, but medieval hospitals were often places where people came to die with dignity rather than to recover and return to their lives. Amid this social tapestry, the economic realities dictated much of the hospital's operation. These institutions ran on donations and church funding, which meant that financial shortage was a constant specter. When funds were low, the quality of care took a nosedive, and the available resources were stretched thinner than a medieval relic's credibility. This scarcity bred an environment where efficiency was paramount, and waste was a sin as grave as the ailments being treated. As the afternoon sun casts long shadows across the stone floors, you witness firsthand how the social hierarchy and economic constraints shape the hospital's daily rhythm. The nuns tend to the sick with a resolute grace, the monks administer spiritual comfort, and the barber surgeons sharpen their tools for the next unlucky patient. It's a delicate dance of duty and devotion, all performed under the watchful eyes of the church. The medieval hospital was a paradox, a place where the sacred and the profane collided in a daily struggle for survival. It was a world where the lines between life and death, healing and harm, were as blurred as the stained glass windows filtering the waning light. And while you might not last a day in this place without longing for the comforts of modern life, there's something humbling about the resilience of those who did. In this setting, the church's influence was omnipresent, a reminder of the divine mission underpinning every act of care. The staff's devotion was less about medical miracles and more about embodying the church's ideals of charity and compassion. And as you navigate these hallowed halls, you're left with a profound appreciation for the human spirit's capacity to endure, even when the odds are as long as a medieval epic. As the afternoon rounds wind down, you find yourself swept up in the hospital's quiet rhythm, a witness to a world where healing was as much about solace as it was about survival. And while you might be yearning for the antiseptic certainty of a modern clinic, there's something undeniably compelling about this historical tableau, where faith and medicine waltz to the timeless tune of human resilience. As the afternoon sun begins its descent, casting long, dramatic shadows across the hospital's stone corridors, you find yourself contemplating the peculiar blend of faith and function that defines this medieval institution. The air here seems to whisper stories of resilience and resignation, where every shadow tells tales of survival against the odds. It's time to put on your historical thinking cap and reflect on how these early hospitals, with all their quirks and quackeries, laid the groundwork for the modern healthcare systems we often take for granted. First, let's tackle the elephant in the infirmary, the church's role in all this. Yes, the church was the unofficial healthcare provider of the medieval world, and its influence was as unavoidable as a medieval plague. Monasteries and convents were the epicenters of healthcare, where monks and nuns did their best to keep body and soul together. It wasn't perfect, far from it, but it was the start of something big. These institutions were the first to say, hey, maybe we should look after the sick, setting the stage for the idea that society has a duty to care for its vulnerable members. Fast forward a few centuries, and you can see the echoes of these medieval practices in the public health systems we rely on today. Consider how hospitals during the 19th century began to shift from religious charitable organizations to state-funded entities. The Industrial Revolution, with all its smoke-belching factories and overcrowded cities, made it clear that public health wasn't just a nice-to-have, it was a necessity. The rise of modern hospitals, with their focus on hygiene, science, and specialized care, was built on the foundations laid by those medieval forerunners. So, next time you're in a hospital, take a moment to thank those monks and nuns for getting the ball rolling, even if their methods were a bit, let's say, medieval. But let's not get too carried away on the wings of nostalgia. Those medieval hospitals were far from the serene wellness retreats depicted in some overly romanticized accounts. Sure, it's tempting to imagine them as quaint sanctuaries where wise monks dispensed herbal wisdom and gentle care. The reality, however, was often a grim struggle against overwhelming odds. Mortality rates were sky-high, and those soothing chants of the monks were as much for the departing souls as for the living. The fact that these places were more waiting rooms for the afterlife than centers of recovery is a testament to the harsh conditions and limited medical knowledge of the time. So why does the myth of the idyllic medieval hospital persist? Perhaps it's human nature to romanticize the past, to believe that simpler times must have been better in some way. There's a certain appeal in the image of a world untouched by modern complexities, where care was personal and community-driven. But when you scratch the surface, you find a reality that was often brutal and unforgiving. It's a reminder that the past, while fascinating, was not always a golden age of wisdom and tranquility. Despite the grim realities, there's something undeniably admirable about the spirit of those who staffed and supported these early hospitals. They worked with what they had, driven by a commitment to charity and care that transcended the limitations of their environment. It's this spirit of resilience and community that continues to inspire modern public health efforts. The idea that healthcare should be accessible to all, regardless of wealth or status, is a legacy that we owe, in part, to those medieval institutions. As you watch the sun dip below the horizon, casting the hospital in a warm, golden glow, it's hard not to feel a sense of connection to the countless souls who passed through these stone walls. Their struggles and stories are woven into the fabric of history, reminding us of the enduring human spirit that persists even in the face of adversity. The medieval hospital may have been a place of limited medical miracles, but it was also a beacon of hope and humanity. In wrapping up our journey through the medieval hospital, it's clear that these institutions were more than just relics of a bygone era. They were the crucibles in which modern healthcare was forged, shaped by the interplay of faith, necessity, and the relentless human pursuit of betterment. So next time you find yourself in the sterile corridors of a modern hospital, take a moment to appreciate the long and winding road that brought us here. From the incense-filled halls of medieval infirmaries to the high-tech medical centers of today, the journey of healthcare has been one of progress, perseverance, and above all, a testament to the enduring human commitment to care for one another. In the thick, muddy trenches of World War I, where every day brought a new definition of hell, soldiers were not only battling the enemy, but also the more intimate adversaries of loneliness and desperation. A curious cocktail of fear, boredom, and testosterone brewed beneath their dirt-streaked uniforms, leading to a whole new front line, the sexual battlefield. Forget the romanticized notions of wartime gallantry and noble sacrifices. The reality was much grittier, and let's face it, disturbingly human. While the war raged on in Europe, a different kind of conflict was unfolding in the soldiers' pants. Imagine being stuck in a trench for weeks, surrounded by the dead and dying, with the constant threat of artillery fire. It's enough to make anyone crave a distraction, no matter how fleeting. The result? Thousands of soldiers indulging in brief liaisons whenever leave permitted, seeking solace in the arms of women who were often as desperate for a moment of normalcy as the men themselves. But these encounters were anything but carefree. Enter venereal diseases, syphilis, gonorrhea, and the like. These were the real silent killers of the war, claiming more soldiers than the trenches ever could. In 1918, the United States Army recorded that venereal diseases accounted for over 18,000 hospitalizations. That's right, just as many, if not more, casualties were caused by a lack of protection than by enemy fire. Governments, as you might expect, were less than thrilled by these unsanctioned alliances. The British Army, for instance, grappled with a startling fact. By 1915, nearly 150,000 British soldiers had been treated for venereal disease. To put that in perspective, that's about the population of a small city getting sidelined not by bullets, but by bacteria. This wasn't just a health crisis. It was an operational nightmare. Desperate times called for some truly desperate measures. The military's response was a bizarre mix of prudishness and pragmatism. They tried everything from moralistic lectures to handing out prophylactics. In a move that probably wouldn't fly today, the U.S. military distributed prophylactic kits, a charming euphemism for early versions of STI prevention packs containing antiseptic ointments. Imagine trying to explain to a soldier fresh from the battlefield that his next battle involved applying a medicinal paste. Not exactly the stuff of heroic war stories, but the real kicker. The treatments for these diseases were about as advanced as using a butter knife in surgery. Mercury was a popular cure for syphilis, despite its toxic nature. Yes, the same element we now handle with hazmat suits was, back then, the go-to remedy. It's a wonder anyone survived the cure, let alone the disease. Then there was the infamous salvarsan, also known as 606, a compound that was supposed to fight syphilis, but often left patients sicker than before. Its side effects were so notorious that some soldiers preferred the disease to the treatment. The French, on the other hand, took a somewhat laissez-faire approach. Prostitution was legalized in France, and brothels known as Masons' Tolérés were regularly frequented by soldiers on leave. This wasn't just tolerated, it was practically institutionalized. The government even supervised these establishments to ensure they complied with health standards. Yes, the country of love had a very pragmatic approach to keeping its soldiers healthy. And speaking of institutions, our friends at the IMCA, yes, the same IMCA that encourages you to have a good time in their famous song, played a surprising role in the war effort. They set up recreation huts to keep soldiers occupied and hopefully steer them away from more carnal distractions. These huts offered everything from billiards to concerts, a sort of early attempt at keeping soldiers entertained without resorting to less wholesome activities. But let's be real. When you're surrounded by death and destruction, a game of pool might not quite match the appeal of human contact. But it wasn't just the soldiers who were impacted. Women who engaged in sex work near military camps faced their own battles. They were often vilified, blamed for spreading disease, and subjected to harsh treatments themselves. The irony is as thick as mud. The very soldiers who sought out their company turned around and condemned them. In some cases, women were even detained and forcibly treated for diseases they may not have had, all in the name of protecting the military's fighting force. Why does all this matter? Because it highlights how war affects every facet of life, even those we might prefer to keep private. It underscores the complexities of human needs and the often absurd lengths to which institutions will go to control them. It also shatters any lingering illusions that war is a purely noble endeavor, revealing the raw, unvarnished truth of what it means to be human in times of unimaginable stress. And as governments scrambled to address these issues, they unwittingly laid the groundwork for modern sexual health practices. The war forced a conversation about sexual health out of the shadows and into the harsh light of day, paving the way for more progressive attitudes in the future. It was a messy, uncomfortable, and often ugly process, but it was a start. So, next time someone waxes poetic about the bravery and sacrifice of World War I soldiers, remember that their battles weren't just fought with guns and bayonets. They were also waged in the more intimate trenches of human desire and frailty, a reminder that history is as much about our flaws as it is our virtues. Amidst the surreal tapestry of World War I, where courage and chaos danced a grim waltz, governments embarked on an unorthodox mission to marshal sexuality as a weapon of morale. Propaganda, that sly puppeteer of public perception, found a new string to pull, and boy, did it get creative. The The powers that be knew that the heartstrings of soldiers and civilians alike could sway the tides of war, so they orchestrated a symphony of symbols and slogans, blending the sacred and the scandalous in ways that would make even a modern marketing exec blush. Picture this, but not too vividly. Recruitment posters that didn't just call men to arms, but subtly whispered promises of romantic conquests and patriotic duty intertwined. The subtext was clear. Join the fight, and you'll be the knight in shining armor. Ladies love a hero. It was a clever move, tapping into the primal need for connection and purpose. After all, who wouldn't want to be the dashing protagonist in their own life story, especially when the alternative was a monotonous existence at home? The British, ever the masters of understatement, rolled out propaganda that dripped with innuendo. One particularly cheeky poster depicted a soldier, standing proud and resolute, while a woman gazed adoringly at him with the caption, "Women of Britain say, go." The message was as subtle as a sledgehammer. Enlist, and you'll not only defend the empire, but also be the object of admiration and desire. It was a not-so-gentle reminder that bravery on the battlefield would translate to glory in the bedroom, or so the story went. But it wasn't all seductive whispers and promises of post-war romantic escapades. The darker side of this propaganda blitzkrieg was a moral tug-of-war that would make Victorian prudes puff with pride. Governments were stuck in a juggling act, tossing up titillation with one hand while wagging a finger of moral superiority with the other. Censorship and sexual liberation waltzed a bizarre tango, each trying to lead, but neither willing to let go. This was the era of pamphlets that doubled as both recruitment tools and morality tales, warning soldiers of the dangers that lurked in the shadows of brothels and bars. The United States, not to be outdone in the moralizing department, launched campaigns that painted venereal diseases as the true enemy, more insidious than the Kaiser's troops. Posters depicted skeletal figures representing syphilis and gonorrhea, lurking behind scantily clad women, ready to strike. The underlying message was clear: keep your trousers zipped or suffer the consequences. Meanwhile, in France, the government's laissez-faire attitude toward pleasure and pragmatism extended to its propaganda efforts as well. French posters often featured idyllic scenes of joyous soldiers in the company of equally contented women, suggesting a life of both duty and delight. It was a balancing act that allowed the French to maintain their reputation for romance while quietly acknowledging the realities of war. But let's not forget the economic context underpinning these propagandist escapades. War is expensive, the kind of expensive that makes your head spin faster than a roulette wheel in Monte Carlo. And when you're funneling millions into artillery and rations, you need a steady flow of willing recruits. Convincing men to sign up wasn't just about patriotism. It was about making enlistment seem like a one-way ticket to adventure and admiration, with a side of societal approval. Yet, in this cacophony of messages, women weren't just passive players in a man's world. They were pivotal to the narrative. On the home front, while men were off playing soldier, women took on jobs that had once been the exclusive domain of men, from factory work to clerical positions. This shift wasn't just economic, it was a seismic social change, planting seeds for the suffrage movement. Propaganda seized on this too, depicting women as the backbone of the war effort, painting them in a light that was both empowering and strategically utilitarian. Now, was it all sunshine and roses? Hardly. The romanticized notion of wartime love and valor often glossed over the harsh realities. The emotional toll of separation, the crippling anxiety of waiting for news from the front, and the stark reality of loss were conveniently sidelined in favor of a glossy narrative. The myth of the gallant soldier and the devoted sweetheart was a powerful motivator, but it was also a mirage, a marketing ploy that didn't quite capture the full spectrum of human experience during wartime. But here's the kicker. While governments peddled these narratives, they inadvertently sowed the seeds for post-war social change. The war, with its mix of propaganda and practicality, forced a re-evaluation of traditional gender roles, nudging society toward a more modern understanding of equality. Women who had tasted independence were less inclined to return to the status quo, and the soldiers who survived were forever changed by the experience, less likely to fit neatly into pre-war molds. As we delve deeper into this tangled web of sex, war, and propaganda, remember that history is never just black and white. It's a kaleidoscope of human motivations, ripe with contradictions and complexities. The stories we tell ourselves about the past often reveal more about our desires and fears than the reality itself. And as World War I raged on, those stories were as crucial to survival as any rifle or ration, shaping the hearts and minds of those caught in its relentless churn. Now, with the stage set by propaganda and the societal upheaval of war, let's focus our lens on the women who stepped up to fill the void left by men marching off to the front lines. These women found themselves thrust into roles that had traditionally been the exclusive domain of their male counterparts. The war, with its insatiable appetite for manpower, inadvertently became the catalyst for a seismic shift in gender roles. The factories, once echoing with the gruff chatter of men, now rang with the voices of women whose nimble fingers and steady hands kept the wheels of industry turning. By 1918, in Britain alone, nearly 1 million women were employed in munitions factories, a detail that underscores the sheer scale of this social transformation. This wasn't just about keeping the lights on. It was about women proving they were capable of handling so-called men's work, and doing it well. Meanwhile, the economic implications of this shift were nothing short of revolutionary. Women, many of whom had never earned their own wages, found themselves with disposable income and a newfound sense of independence. This wasn't just pocket change. We're talking about wages that allowed women to support families and even indulge in consumer goods previously out of reach. The war, though brutal, lit the spark of economic autonomy for countless women, a spark that would continue to burn well into the 20th century. But let's not get carried away with the idea that this was a utopia of gender equality. Oh no, the patriarchy didn't roll over that easily. Women were often paid less than their male predecessors for the same work, a grim reminder that the struggle for equality was far from over. Yet, they demonstrated resilience and tenacity in the face of these systemic inequities, laying the groundwork for future movements demanding equal pay for equal work. Now, while these factory floors hummed with the rhythm of wartime production, another, more controversial chapter was unfolding. Into the world of wartime sex work, a topic often romanticized yet rife with complexity. These women, operating in the shadow of war's chaos, played an unheralded role in maintaining morale. Their work, though stigmatized, was a crucial, if unacknowledged, element of the war effort. Sex work was hardly a new phenomenon, but the war amplified its scale and significance. With millions of soldiers far from home, the demand for companionship skyrocketed. In France, for example, Masons' Tarleries became hubs of both pleasure and peril. These establishments operated under the watchful eye of the government, which sought to regulate and control the spread of venereal diseases. It's a curious blend of regulation and tacit endorsement, highlighting the pragmatic approach taken by some governments. Yet, the tale of these women is not just one of economic necessity. It's also about survival and agency in a world that offered them few options. They navigated a dangerous landscape, where their bodies were both commodified and vilified. The very soldiers who sought their company often turned around and scapegoated them for societal ills, a bitter irony that underscores the hypocrisy of the era. In Britain, the situation was no less fraught. Venereal disease was a heart-button issue, and sex workers were frequently blamed for the spread of infections. The Contagious Diseases Acts of the late 19th century, a precursor to the attitudes of this era, had already painted sex workers as vectors of illness rather than victims of circumstance. During the war, this stigma persisted, leading to policies that were more punitive than protective. Women suspected of carrying diseases were subjected to invasive examinations and forced treatment, measures that reflect the misogynistic undercurrents of the time. Despite these challenges, many women in this line of work found ways to exert control over their circumstances. Some used their earnings to support families, while others managed to negotiate better conditions for themselves. It was a precarious existence, but one that offered a form of empowerment in an otherwise disempowering context. The economic backdrop to this scene is crucial to understanding the motivations at play. War economies thrive on the backs of those who can adapt and endure, often at great personal cost. While governments poured resources into the war machine, the individuals caught in its gears were left to fend for themselves in a landscape where morality and survival were often at odds. As the war dragged on, these dynamics only intensified. The longer the conflict continued, the more entrenched these new social roles became. Women, having tasted the fruits of independence, were less inclined to return to pre-war norms. This shift, though gradual, was irreversible, setting the stage for the suffrage movements that gained momentum in the post-war years. The war had inadvertently laid bare the inequities of the era, and women were no longer content to accept the status quo. But let's not romanticize this too much. The transition was anything but smooth. Many men returning from the front lines found themselves displaced in a job market that had adjusted to their absence. This led to tensions as society struggled to reconcile the new roles women had assumed with the traditional expectations of the time. The post-war period was a crucible of social change, as women who had shouldered the burden of the home front refused to relinquish their hard-won autonomy. In this tumultuous landscape, one thing was clear: the war had forever altered the fabric of society. It exposed the fragility of gender norms and revealed the potential for a more equitable division of labor. Yet, the realities of these changes were complex and fraught with contradictions. The war was a catalyst, but the road to true equality was long and winding, filled with both triumphs and setbacks. As we delve deeper into this narrative, remember that history is a tapestry woven from the threads of countless individual stories. Each thread, whether bright or dark, contributes to the larger picture. And in the case of World War I, the stories of women, whether factory workers or sex workers, are integral to understanding the broader impact of the conflict. They remind us that even in the darkest times, human resilience and ingenuity shine through, challenging the status quo and paving the way for future generations. As we wade deeper into the murky waters of World War I's sexual dynamics, it's time to turn our gaze beyond the home front and into the international scene. Imagine soldiers from every corner of the globe suddenly thrust into foreign lands, brimming with cultural quirks and tantalizing mysteries. You can bet your boots that these encounters were more tangled than a bowl of spaghetti. First up, let's unpack the whole exoticism vs. reality conundrum. Take the American doughboys, for example. Fresh off the boat and into the French countryside, they arrived with wide eyes and a laundry list of stereotypes. French women were viewed through a lens of romantic fantasy, fueled by wartime propaganda and pre-war literature depicting them as the epitome of seductive allure. The truth, however, was a bit more complex than a Monet painting. Many soldiers were in for a rude awakening when their idealized fantasies met the practical realities of war-weary France. Primary sources, like soldier diaries and letters home, reveal a clash of expectations. One soldier noted his surprise at finding French women to be ordinary and quite unlike the pictures in magazines. The reality was that these women, just like those on the home front, were enduring the harshness of war, and their daily lives were far from the romanticized fabrications. And then there was the language barrier, a comedy of errors waiting to happen. Imagine trying to impress or even communicate with someone when your French vocabulary is limited to bonjour, merci, and the all-important vin rouge. Many soldiers relied on a mishmash of broken phrases, hand gestures, and when all else failed, the universal language of awkward smiles. In a world without Google Translate, misunderstandings were as common as mud in the trenches. Of course, these cross-cultural exchanges weren't limited to France. The British, stationed in Egypt and the Middle East, found themselves navigating a whole new world of cultural nuances. Here, the soldiers were not just tourists, but invaders, a fact that did little to endear them to the local population. British soldiers often brought with them preconceived notions about the mystical East, fueled by Orientalist fantasies that had been popularized in Western literature for centuries. Spoiler alert, reality didn't quite match the Arabian Nights. These interactions were fraught with tension, not least because of the power dynamics at play. In many cases, local women were viewed as exotic objects rather than individuals with their own agency and desires. This imbalance was exacerbated by the colonial attitudes of the time, which often cast non-European cultures as inferior or backward. The soldiers, armed with these damaging stereotypes, frequently reduced complex cultures to a series of clichés, a practice about as enlightened as using a sundial in a digital age. But if you think the soldiers were the only ones caught off guard, think again. Local populations had their own preconceptions about the foreign troops marching through their streets. For many, particularly in rural areas, these encounters were their first brush with the outside world, and the soldiers were as much a curiosity to the locals as the locals were to the soldiers. According to some accounts, children would follow soldiers around, fascinated by their uniforms and the strange sounds of their language. It was an intercontinental game of who's that, and let's not overlook the economic angle. War-torn economies meant that, for many local women, fraternizing with soldiers wasn't just an exercise in cultural exchange. It was a matter of survival. This transactional nature of relationships adds yet another layer of complexity to the narrative. In many cases, what appeared on the surface as a simple romantic or sexual encounter was underpinned by economic necessity, stark reminder of the harsh realities wrought by war. These encounters were also a hotbed for stereotypes to breed like rabbits. Soldiers often returned home with tales of exotic lands, and the women they met, stories that were equal parts embellishment and misunderstanding. These narratives contributed to a lasting legacy of cultural stereotypes, some of which persist to this day, painting entire cultures with the broad brushstrokes of a few individual experiences. The tension between exoticism and reality wasn't limited to Europe and the Middle East. On the Eastern Front, German soldiers stationed in Russia and Eastern Europe encountered a similarly bewildering array of cultural differences. Here, too, soldiers' letters and diaries reveal a mix of fascination and frustration as they tried to make sense of unfamiliar customs and social norms. One German officer lamented in his journal that the local women were not like our German girls, which, if you ask me, is probably a good thing for everyone involved. These international dimensions of sexual practices during the war highlight the broader social and political currents of the time. They show how war is not just about battles and borders. It's also about the intimate, often messy intersections of culture, power, and human desire. The clash between exoticism and reality is a reminder that while soldiers may have come from different corners of the globe, their experiences were tied together by common threads of misunderstanding and stereotype. As we barrel toward the end of this historical exploration, it's clear that World War I wasn't just a clash of nations. It was a collision of cultures, each with its own set of assumptions and biases. These encounters, for better or worse, left a lasting imprint on the soldiers who lived them and the societies they touched. And while the war itself eventually came to an end, the ripple effects of these cultural exchanges continued to shape worldviews long after the last shot was fired. So, while we've untangled some of the myths and realities that shaped soldiers' experiences abroad, there's still more to uncover. The war may have been a century ago, but its legacy lingers on, a complex tapestry of history woven from the threads of countless individual stories. And as we prepare to dive into the next chapter, remember, history isn't just about what happened. It's about the stories we tell and the truths we choose to uncover. As we turn the final pages of this historical exploration, it's time to reflect on how World War I's tumultuous blend of trench warfare and sexual dynamics set the stage for the roller coaster of the Roaring Twenties. Picture society as a bottle of champagne, corked tightly during the war, only to burst open in a fizzy explosion of jazz, flappers, and a seismic shift in societal norms once the guns fell silent. Let's talk about the elephant in the room, the sexual revolution. While the term might make you think of free love in the 1960s, its roots actually trace back to the aftermath of World War I. The war had shattered traditional structures, leaving a generation eager to break free from the suffocating grip of Victorian morality. Soldiers returning home were not just bringing back tales of battle and camaraderie, but also new attitudes toward love and relationships, influenced by their wartime experiences. They had seen the world, or at least a trench-side version of it, and were no longer content with the old norms. The economic boom of the 1920s provided the perfect backdrop for these changing attitudes. With the war machine dismantled, industries pivoted to consumer goods, fueling a hedonistic fervor that would have made Dionysus blush. The flapper became the emblem of this new era. Her barbed hair and knee-length skirts a middle finger to the prudish past. But it wasn't just fashion. It was about freedom. Freedom to love, to explore, to to redefine what it meant to be a woman in a rapidly modernizing world. This newfound freedom was mirrored in the realm of relationships. The war had spurred discussions on sexual health, albeit clumsily, and the 1920 saw a burgeoning interest in birth control. The infamous Margaret Sanger, a nurse and birth control advocate, became a household name for promoting contraception as a means of empowering women. By 1921, she had founded the American Birth Control League, a precursor to Planned Parenthood, challenging the status quo and pushing for women's autonomy over their own bodies. But let's not get too starry-eyed about this societal evolution. The Roaring Twenties weren't all glitz and glamour. They were also a period of stark inequality and cultural clashes. While urban areas embraced modernity, rural regions clung to traditional values, creating a cultural chasm that was both geographic and ideological. This tension was epitomized by the 1925 Scopes trial, where science and religion duked it out in a Tennessee courtroom over the teaching of evolution, a clear signal that the country was grappling with the pace of change. The war's impact on sexuality also reverberated through the arts. Writers like F. Scott Fitzgerald and Ernest Hemingway captured the zeitgeist with their tales of disillusionment and excess. Fitzgerald's The Great Gatsby painted a vivid picture of love, longing, and the pursuit of the American dream, an illusion as fragile as a champagne bubble. Meanwhile, Hemingway's lean, muscular prose often reflected the raw, unvarnished truths he had witnessed as an ambulance driver during the war. Their works, along with those of other lost generation writers, dissected the complexities of love and desire in a world that had been irrevocably altered by conflict. And then there's the enduring myth of the warrior lover, a trope that continues to captivate our collective imagination. The image of the battle-hardened soldier returning to sweep a lover off their feet is a narrative that Hollywood has milked for all it's worth. From Gone with the Wind to Casablanca, it's a romantic fantasy that taps into our deepest desires for heroism and love, even if the reality is often messier and less glamorous. So, what does all this mean for us today? The legacy of World War I's sexual dynamics is woven into the very fabric of modern relationships. The war forced societies to confront taboos, to question norms, and to consider the complexities of human desire in a way that was previously unthinkable. It laid the groundwork for the sexual freedoms we often take for granted, even as it left us with lingering stereotypes and myths that continue to shape our perceptions of love and sexuality. As we close this chapter, let's remember that history is not just a series of dates and events, but a living, breathing tapestry of human experience. It's a reminder that the past is never truly behind us. It echoes through the corridors of time, influencing the present in ways both profound and subtle. So next time you find yourself caught up in a romantic daydream or grappling with the complexities of modern relationships, take a moment to ponder the soldiers, the flappers, and the dreamers who came before us. Their stories are our stories, and their struggles and triumphs continue to shape the world we live in today. You're in East Berlin, 1989, where the air tastes like oppression and coal dust. The wall looms not just as a physical barrier, but as an enormous concrete reminder that freedom is a few meters away, but might as well be light years. This is Berlin in the twilight of the Cold War, a city sliced in half by ideology, concrete, and enough barbed wire to make even the hardiest of fences weep. On your side of the divide, the economic landscape is a study in bleakness. That monthly paycheck, it's a measly one, 200 East German marks, which might buy you a couple of good meals in the West, but here barely stretches to cover the basics. The shelves in stores look like minimalism gone wrong, bare and echoing, with shortages of everything from fresh fruit to toilet paper. Yes, toilet paper. When you have to think twice about the availability of toilet paper, you know it's time for a change. The contrast with the capitalist West is almost comical, if it weren't so tragic. Over there, neon lights flash, markets buzz, and the latest technology and fashion trends seem to dance in the shop windows, taunting you with their abundance. Meanwhile, in East Berlin, you're stuck in a time warp, a living museum of 1950s austerity, where the color gray is the reigning monarch. But hey, isn't there a certain romance in this gritty struggle? Or so the myth goes. The reality, though, is far less rosy, colored more by the drab hues of endurance and quiet desperation. And let's talk about the Stasi while we're at it, because nothing says social atmosphere quite like a network of informants that would make a spider's web look sparse. Picture this. 1 in every 63 citizens is an informant. It's a bit like living in a real-life Orwellian novel, except this is no work of fiction. You're constantly looking over your shoulder, wondering if your next-door neighbor, your colleague, or even your family is whispering about you into a secret microphone. Your phone could be bugged, your mail read, and your privacy is about as robust as a piece of wet tissue paper. It's not just paranoia if they really are watching you, and in East Berlin, you could bet your last Eastern mark that they were. While you're navigating this maze of shortages and surveillance, the political scene is doing its own dance of chaos. Enter stage right. Mikhail Gorbachev, the Soviet leader with a penchant for change and a birthmark as famous as his policies. His reforms, glasnost and perestroika, are like a breath of fresh air in a room that's been sealed too long. But here's the kicker. While Gorbachev's opening windows, the whole Soviet structure is teetering on the edge. The iron grip that held the Eastern Bloc together is rusting, and East Germany is feeling the tremors. You're living on a fault line of history, and the ground is starting to shake. The East German government is trying to hold it together with the political equivalent of duct tape and crossed fingers, but everyone knows a change is coming. It's the kind of atmosphere that makes you feel both excited and terrified, like standing on the precipice of a roller coaster drop. So here you are, in a city that's both a prison and a stage, with a front row seat to the drama unfolding. East Berlin, 1989, where every day feels like a test of patience, and where the future is a mystery wrapped in barbed wire and bureaucracy. The night of freedom is coming, but for now, you're stuck in the grey waiting room of history. And just when you think the tension can't get any thicker, on November 9, 1989, the unthinkable happens. The day begins like any other, with that familiar blend of grey skies and grey buildings, but beneath the mundane, the stage is set for a historic surprise. You see, the East German government, in its infinite wisdom, decided it was time for a little policy update regarding travel, something about easing restrictions, nothing too dramatic, or so they thought. They planned to roll it out slowly, like a cautious parent handing the car keys to a teenager, but the execution was about as smooth as a roller coaster on square wheels. Enter Günter Schabowski, the hapless government spokesman, whose press conference delivery would rival any comedy of errors. Armed with only half the memo and a full dose of uncertainty, Schabowski stumbles through the announcement like a man trying to find his glasses in a dark room. He mentions that the new travel regulations would come into effect immediately, a word that lands like a bombshell. The press room erupts, questions flying faster than gossip in a small town. When does this take effect? A journalist asks, hoping for clarity. Schabowski, flipping through his notes like a student cramming before an exam, mutters the fateful word again. Immediately. Now, if you've ever played the game of telephone, you know how messages can morph. Within hours, the news spreads like wildfire through East Berlin. People hear that the wall is open, the gates are flung wide, and freedom is there for the taking. Is it accurate? Not exactly. But in a land where hope has been rationed like coffee, more than enough to spark action. And so, as the evening unfolds, crowds begin to gather at the checkpoints. Thousands of East Berliners, fueled by a cocktail of disbelief and excitement, march towards the wall like moths to a very symbolic flame. First-hand accounts describe the scene as electric, people clutching radios to their ears, whispering the news to neighbors, and daring to believe the unbelievable. It's not just a rush for freedom. It's a collective leap of faith. The border guards, caught off guard by this human tsunami, are as bewildered as anyone. Imagine being handed a rule book just as the rules are being rewritten by the crowd in front of you. Orders. The guards have none, and the telephones, those supposed lifelines to higher command, are about as useful as a chocolate teapot. So, faced with a mass of hopeful citizens, they do the only thing they can. They step aside. It's a moment that's both mundane and monumental, a simple act of stepping back that echoes through history. Now here's where the myth machine revs into high gear. The narrative of heroic guards throwing open the gates under secret orders is tempting, like the plot twist in a spy novel. But in reality, it was less about strategy and more about sheer human inertia. Faced with a tidal wave of people and no clear directive, the guards made a split-second decision that would change the world. As the Berlin Wall effectively crumbles, Not with a bang, but with a collective gasp. The myths start to solidify. Was it a planned dismantling, a political masterstroke? Not exactly. It was the kind of spontaneous, chaotic brilliance that history textbooks struggle to capture. A revolution born of confusion, courage, and a whole lot of serendipity. So, as you stand in this moment of history, it's not a polished tale of triumph, but a raw, real testament to the power of the human spirit. The wall, once an imposing symbol of division, crumbles under the weight of its own absurdity. And you, in the midst of it all, are part of a story that's both legendary and beautifully imperfect. The night is yours, and the world will never be quite the same. And so, here you are, standing on the precipice of history, the air crackling with possibility and the scent of freedom. Well, freedom and a touch of exhaust from the Trabants that are now being abandoned like yesterday's news. As you cross over into West Berlin, it feels like stepping through the looking glass. 1 minute, you're in the land of grey and grit, and the next, you're enveloped in a world that seems to be in technicolor. It's like Dorothy landing in Oz, only with more neon signs and fewer flying monkeys. The first thing that hits you is the noise. West Berlin is alive, buzzing with a kind of energy that's almost tangible. It's a cacophony of laughter, music, and the distinct pop of champagne bottles being opened. Thousands of East Berliners, just like you, are pouring through the checkpoints, greeted by West Berliners as if they're long-lost family. And in a way, they are. You're handed a banana, a fruit that's been more myth than reality in your life up until now, and a beer to wash down the disbelief. Now, let's talk about bananas for a moment, because they've become a symbol in this story that's both charming and absurd. You see, in East Germany, bananas were as rare as hen's teeth. They were the stuff of legend, whispered about in the same breath as freedom and Levi jeans. So, when West Berliners hand you this golden fruit, it's not just a snack. It's a taste of the exotic, a tangible sign that you've crossed into a world of abundance. For you, a banana isn't just a fruit, it's a revelation. But here's the kicker. While you're savoring this newfound bounty, you're also stepping into an economic whirlwind. The Deutschmark, the coveted currency of the West, is now within reach. The exchange rate is a dizzying dance of numbers, making your East German marks seem like monopoly money. Officially, 1 West German mark is worth about 4 East German marks, but in the black market, the rate swings wildly, like a pendulum in a storm. It's instant capitalism, and you're swept up in its wake. Shopping sprees become the order of the day, or rather night. Department stores stay open late, their aisles filled with everything you've only seen on smuggled Western TV broadcasts. You find yourself staring at shelves stocked with chocolates, electronics, and fashion that doesn't look like it was designed in a Soviet-era bunker. It's overwhelming, exhilarating, and a little terrifying all at once. You're in a consumer wonderland, but the rules have changed, and you're trying to learn them on the fly. The psychological impact is as profound as the economic one. You've grown up in a world where scarcity was normal, where making do with less was a way of life. And now, confronted with this abundance, it's like trying to drink from a fire hose. There's a sense of liberation, sure, but also a disorienting feeling of being unmoored. You're stepping into a world that was once a distant fantasy, and now it's reality. But it's a reality that demands quick adjustments. Back home, East Berlin feels like it's been left behind in a time warp. The contrast is stark and jarring. You're aware that this moment of jubilation is both a beginning and an end. The wall may be open, but it's not just a physical barrier that's crumbling. It's the entire structure of a society. The myths of socialist utopia are evaporating under the harsh light of consumerism, and you're standing at the crossroads trying to make sense of it all. And then there are the stories, the legends that will grow with each retelling. The night becomes an instant myth, a tale of spontaneous freedom that glosses over the complexities. It's tempting to see it as a straightforward triumph, a fairy tale of liberation. But underneath, there's a more nuanced narrative, one of uncertainty and upheaval. It's a moment where history feels alive, where the personal and the political collide in a dance that's anything but choreographed. As you stand there, banana in one hand and beer in the other, you're part of a story that's still being written. The night is a whirlwind of emotions, a heady mix of euphoria and trepidation. The wall is down, but the path ahead is uncharted, and the future is as uncertain as it is exciting. You're in the throes of a revolution that's both personal and collective, and it's a ride that promises to be anything but predictable. So, here you are, on the first night of a new reality, where the myths of the past are giving way to the challenges of the future. It's not just a night of freedom, it's a night that marks the beginning of a journey, one that will take you and East Berlin into a world that's suddenly wide open. And while the wall may have crumbled, the stories are just beginning, and you're in the midst of a narrative that will echo through the years to come. As you stand there, banana in one hand and beer in the other, you're on the cusp of a whirlwind of change that's about to shake East Berlin like an etch a sketch after a toddler's artistic spree. This isn't just about crossing a physical barrier. It's about stepping into a realm where history is being rewritten faster than you can say unification. In the days following that euphoric night, the political landscape is nothing short of a tectonic shift. East Germany's government, once as rigid as a Cold War action figure, is now scrambling to catch up with the tidal wave of change sweeping the nation. Enter the Round Table Talks, a series of discussions that sound like something out of a King Arthur fan fiction, but are in fact the epicenter of political transformation. These meetings bring together government officials, opposition groups, and various societal representatives in a bid to hammer out the future of a nation that's been living a split personality for decades. Now, let's not kid ourselves. These talks are no breezy coffee clatch. They're intense, filled with the kind of debates that could make a reality TV show look like a knitting circle. But they're crucial, setting the stage for free elections, and eventually the reunification of Germany. It's a political ballet, and everyone's learning new steps on the fly. Meanwhile, as the ink dries on new political agreements, the social fabric of East Germany is being pulled tighter than a pair of 80s spandex leggings. The romantic notion of freedom is quickly juxtaposed with the harsh reality of economic upheaval. With the collapse of the centralized economy, unemployment rates skyrocket like a fireworks show gone rogue. By 1990, unemployment rate in East Germany will hit around 20%, a number that feels as dizzying as your first ride on a merry-go-round that won't stop. And here's where the myth of the freedom fairy tale takes a nosedive. The once stable, albeit oppressive, job security of the East is replaced by the brutal unpredictability of capitalism. Former state-owned enterprises, unable to compete in the free market, are shutting down faster than you can say privatization. Those Trabant factories that once churned out cars like they were going out of style, well, now they are, quite literally, going out of business. The social dislocation is palpable. People who once found solidarity in shared struggles are now faced with the daunting task of navigating a capitalist jungle where every man, woman, and Trabant is for themselves. It's a bit like being handed a complex IKEA kit without any instructions. Everyone's trying to piece together their lives in a world that's rapidly changing shape. But let's not write off the allure of newfound possibilities just yet. For many, this is also an era of unprecedented opportunities. Education, travel, and entrepreneurial ventures are suddenly on the table, offering a tantalizing taste of what life can be when shackles are lifted. Yet, these possibilities come with their own set of intimidating uncertainties. Imagine being handed the keys to a vast mansion, but not knowing if you can afford the upkeep. That's the catch-22 of newfound freedom, where the horizon is wide open, but the path is strewn with obstacles. And while we're busting myths, let's talk about the narrative of a seamless reunification. The truth, the merger of East and West Germany, is more a shotgun wedding than a fairy tale romance. The economic and cultural disparities are stark. The West German Deutschmark becomes the official currency, effectively pulling the rug out from under the East German economy. It's like being told you've won the lottery, only to find out the prize is a lifetime supply of lint. On October 3, 1990, the day of formal reunification, there are celebrations, sure, but there are also protests, fears, and a sense of loss for a way of life that, while imperfect, was familiar. The policies enacted during this transition period are a mixed bag, with successes and failures that will be dissected for decades to come. The Treuhandanstalt, the agency responsible for privatizing East German enterprises, becomes both a symbol of hope and a lightning rod for criticism. Its efforts to transform the economy are a high-stakes gamble, and not everyone walks away a winner. In the midst of this economic roller coaster, the psychological impact is equally profound. East Germans are grappling with an identity crisis, straddling two worlds and trying to forge a new one. The term nostalgie emerges, nostalgia for the East, a bittersweet longing for the aspects of life left behind. It's a testament to the complexity of human emotion, where the heart yearns for familiarity even as the mind embraces change. Amidst the chaos, the world watches with bated breath. The fall of the Berlin Wall and the subsequent reunification are not just German events, they're global. The Cold War, once a defining feature of international relations, is unraveling like a moth-eaten scarf. In this brave new world, Germany becomes a symbol of both the triumphs and tribulations of freedom, a living laboratory of democracy in action. So, as you navigate this new era, it's clear that the journey ahead is as uncertain as it is promising. The myths of the past are dissolving, and in their place is a reality that's both exhilarating and daunting. But here's the thing about history. It's never just a single narrative. It's a tapestry of stories, each thread weaving its own path through the fabric of time. And you, dear traveler, are not just a witness to this history, but an active participant, shaping the future with every step you take. So keep your eyes wide open, your banana at the ready, and your spirit unyielding. The road ahead is uncharted, the possibilities are endless, and the stories are just beginning to unfold. And so, as you hold your banana like a trophy from an Olympic event you didn't even know you'd entered, you realize you're standing at the crossroads of history. The fall of the Berlin Wall wasn't just a local event. It was a global seismic shift, historical earthquake that sent tremors far beyond the borders of Germany. But let's not pretend it was the end of a storybook, where everyone rode off into the sunset on unicorns. Nope, this was just the prologue to a much more complicated tale. First off, let's talk about the ripple effect across Europe. The Berlin Wall coming down was like the ultimate domino, and when it fell, it set off a chain reaction that reshaped the continent. The Warsaw-packed countries, previously glued together by Soviet influence, started peeling off like stickers on an old suitcase. By the end of 1991, the Soviet Union itself was no more, dissolving into 15 independent republics. That's right. One minute you're a superpower, and the next, you're a collection of newly independent states trying to figure out national anthems and flags. The Cold War, that decades-long staring contest between East and West, ended not with a bang, but with bureaucratic paperwork and political restructuring. And while it might sound like a happy ending, the transition from communism to capitalism in Eastern Europe was about as smooth as sandpaper. Let's face it, turning a command economy into a free market is like converting a typewriter into a smartphone overnight. Cue economic instability, social upheaval, and a learning curve steeper than a Berlin apartment staircase. Now, let's address that tantalizing myth of the end of history, a term coined by political scientist Francis Fukuyama. The idea was that the end of the Cold War signified the ultimate victory of liberal democracy and capitalism. It was as if someone had declared game over on the global ideological battlefield. But reality check. History didn't end. It just changed channels. New challenges cropped up faster than you can say, geopolitical tension, and the world was anything but settled. Remember that nostalgia we mentioned? It's not just a catchy term. It's a real sentiment that took root in the hearts of many former East Germans. While the West brimmed with consumer goods and opportunities, there was a part of the East that missed the sense of community and security that came with the old regime. Sure, the Trabant wasn't going to win any beauty contests, but it was theirs. The nostalgia wasn't for the oppressive state, but for the familiarity and simplicity of a life that, despite its limitations, was known and understood. Integration between East and West Germany was no cakewalk either. It was more like trying to sew together two very different fabrics with a single thread. Economically, the gap was yawning. The infrastructure in the East was outdated, the industries were struggling, and unemployment was a persistent shadow. By 1991, the unemployment rate in the former East hit around 15%, and the economic disparity was a constant reminder of the unfinished journey toward unity. Social integration was another beast entirely, as stereotypes and prejudices simmered beneath the surface, making the dream of a seamless German identity more complex than a Wagner opera. Meanwhile, on the global stage, the collapse of the Soviet Union left a power vacuum that was quickly filled with new conflicts and rivalries. The Balkans erupted into war, Middle Eastern tensions simmered, and new economic powers like China began to flex their muscles. The world, it turned out, was not short of drama even after the Cold War curtain closed. Yet, despite the turbulence, the fall of the wall remains a symbol of human resilience and the relentless pursuit of freedom. It's a testament to the idea that walls, both literal and metaphorical, can be brought down by the collective will of people yearning for change. This night in 1989, when East Berliners stormed the checkpoints with nothing but hope and determination, reminds us that history is not just made by leaders in marble halls, but by everyday people with a thirst for something better. And here's the thing. That hunger for freedom, for a life unfettered by arbitrary divides, continues to resonate today. The Berlin Wall might be a chapter in history books, but its legacy is alive in every movement that challenges oppression, in every protest that demands justice, and in every heart that refuses to accept the status quo. So, as you stand there with your banana and beer, you're not just witnessing history, you're part of a continuum that stretches from the past into the future. The wall may have crumbled, but the stories of courage and change it inspired are still being written. It's a tale with no final page, a narrative that invites us all to contribute our own chapters. In the end, the fall of the Berlin Wall wasn't about an overnight transformation. It was about opening a door to new possibilities and challenges. It's a reminder that while walls can divide us, they can also be the very things that unite us in our quest for a more open, inclusive world. So keep that banana close and your spirits high, because the journey of history is far from over. You're part of a story that transcends borders and time, a story that's as much about the future as it is about the past. Marie Curie's early life reads like an underdog story with a twist. It's set in a time when the world was stacked against her, not just because of her gender, but also due to the political soap opera that was 19th century Poland. Born in 1867 in Warsaw, a city under the thumb of Russian rule, Curie's childhood was a blend of intellectual aspiration and political frustration. Her parents, both educators, were the kind of people who probably had knowledge is power stitched on their doormats, but instead they had to dodge censorship and deal with the fallout of the failed January uprising of 1863. The joys of growing up in a place where even reading the wrong book could land you in hot water. Now, let's talk numbers. Back in those days, tuition at the Flying University, which sounds like a place you go to learn broomstick parking, but was actually a clandestine institution for women, was a whopping zeros loadies because it was illegal and therefore free. The catch: you had to know someone who knew someone. It was like the Fight Club of education. The first rule was to not get caught. In this secretive setting, Marie Skłodowska, as she was known then, soaked up knowledge like a sponge with a PhD. The challenges Curie faced in academia were about as subtle as a sledgehammer. The gender ratio in science classes was laughably skewed. For every woman in the classroom, there were about a dozen men, most of whom probably thought element was just a fancy word for air, water, fire, and earth. But Curie wasn't one to let a little thing like rampant sexism slow her down. She worked as a governess to save money for her education, earning about 400 rubles a year, which even back then was more of a keep-dreaming budget than a pay-your-way-through-school fund. Eventually, Marie set her sights on Paris. Why Paris? Because if you were serious about science, you went to the Sorbonne, where women were actually allowed to enroll, albeit in dismally low numbers. We're talking a gender ratio of 1:20 in favor of men. Not exactly what you'd call a welcoming environment, unless you enjoy being outnumbered by people who might still think your main scientific contribution should be to the kitchen. Traveling to France in the late 19th century wasn't exactly harping on a budget airline with a carry-on and a podcast. Nope, it was more like a logistical nightmare wrapped in a financial conundrum. The journey itself cost about 50 rubles, a small fortune for a governess moonlighting as a human calculator. Once in Paris, Curie squeezed into a tiny garret room, the kind that today would be marketed as cozy or bohemian, but was really just a place where she could touch both walls without getting out of bed. While in Paris, Curie lived off a diet that would make a modern nutritionist weep: bread, butter, and tea. If she was feeling particularly extravagant, she'd throw in the occasional egg. Her budget was tighter than a pair of Victorian corsets, and yet she powered through. In 1893, Curie graduated first in her class in physics. Take that, gender stereotypes. Despite the romanticized tales of her Parisian life, The reality was less midnight in Paris, and more midnight studying on an empty stomach. The legends suggest a life filled with impromptu debates over wine, but the truth was that Curie's social life was about as lively as a tombstone. She was too busy breaking barriers to break bread with the socialites. Curie's journey from Poland to France is a testament to her tenacity. She wasn't just a trailblazer. She was a full-on trail detonator, paving the way for women in science with a determination that was nothing short of radioactive. And as she prepared to dive into the world of X-rays and isotopes, the stage was set for a scientific revolution, one that would bear her name and change the world forever. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. For now, let's just appreciate the irony of a world that tried to sideline her, only to find itself illuminated by the very light she discovered. As Curie prepared to dive into the world of X-rays and isotopes, she had no idea she'd be sparking not just a scientific revolution, but also a radioactive firestorm that would light up the 20th century. Welcome to Paris, where the air was thick with smog, and the scientific community was a bit of a boys' club, with an exclusive membership policy that could give any modern fraternity a run for its money. Enter Marie Curie, armed with sheer grit, an insatiable curiosity, and a hunger for discovery that went beyond her bread-and-butter diet. In the late 1800s, Paris was the place to be if you wanted to rub elbows with the intellectual elite, or at least try to. If you could elbow your way past the crowd of bearded men in tweed jackets. The city was buzzing with ideas, like a giant beehive of innovation, albeit one with a significant gender imbalance. Laboratories were the playgrounds of the privileged, where wealthy patrons funded experiments that were as likely to explode as they were to succeed. This was a time when scientific breakthroughs were happening faster than you could say, Eureka. Funding was tighter than Marie's budget for a warm meal. Speaking of experiments, let's talk about Curie's lab work, which was neither glamorous nor safe by today's standards. Picture a makeshift lab in a converted shed that had seen better days, where the furniture seemed to have a personal vendetta against comfort. The equipment, a hodgepodge of second-hand apparatus that looked like it had been borrowed from a Victorian-era mad scientist. Despite these less-than-ideal conditions, Marie and her husband Pierre Curie managed to discover two new elements, polonium and radium. Polonium, named after Marie's homeland, was like a tiny, patriotic nod to Poland, while radium was the showstopper, glowing with an eerie luminescence that seemed almost magical, until you realized it was also slightly terrifying. Now, let's add some numbers to this radioactive tale. The Curies were working with pitchblende, a mineral that was, to put it mildly, a radioactive mess. From a literal ton of this ore, they extracted a mere fraction of a gram of radium. Let that sink in. 1 ton of rock for a speck of an element that glowed like a nightlight from the depths of hell. The process was laborious, involving endless hours of grinding, boiling, and filtering, all done by hand. It was the kind of work that could make a coal miner's job look like a spa day. The financial struggles of the Curie household could fill a ledger with red ink. Despite being at the cutting edge of science, they were scraping by with barely enough money to pay for their research, let alone their groceries. Radium was worth more than gold by weight, yet the Curies saw little of that wealth. Instead, they poured any profits back into their research, driven by a passion that outshone their bank account. It's like they were the original startup founders, with radium as their groundbreaking app, but without the venture capitalists. Of course, the myth of the lone genius tends to overshadow the reality of scientific collaboration. Marie wasn't working in isolation like a brooding artist in a garret. She had a partner in crime, her husband Pierre. The Curies were the Barney and Clyde of the periodic table, minus the criminal activity. Their partnership was a meeting of minds that was as pragmatic as it was romantic. They shared everything from lab notes to household chores, with a division of labor that would make a modern-day advocate for work-life balance proud. Their lab routines were, to say the least, unconventional. Picture the two of them, surrounded by glass beakers and the omnipresent whiff of chemicals, working side by side in a space that was more chaos than order. They'd often be caught in animated discussions, debating the finer points of atomic theory while dodging the occasional equipment failure. It was teamwork at its finest, though perhaps not the kind you'd want to replicate without a hefty insurance policy. The scientific environment of Paris was a paradox of progress and prejudice. On one hand, it was a city at the forefront of discovery, where ideas flowed as freely as the Seine. On the other, it was a place where women in science were about as common as unicorns at a rodeo. Marie's achievements were groundbreaking, not just for the science, but for the seismic shift they represented in the gender dynamics of the time. She was blazing a trail through the academic wilderness, machete in one hand, flask in the other. In a world that still viewed women as the supporting cast in the drama of science, Marie Curie was the lead actress, director, and producer all rolled into one. She was redefining what it meant to be a scientist, not just for her generation, but for all those that followed. Her discoveries weren't just about radium and polonium. They were about challenging the status quo and proving that brilliance knows no gender. As the Curies continued their work, they unknowingly set the stage for a new era in science, one that would see the atom split and the world forever changed. But let's not jump the gun. For now, let's appreciate the irony of a society that was illuminated by the very discoveries it tried to ignore. Marie Curie wasn't just a scientist. She was a force of nature, and her story was just getting started. Marie Curie wasn't just a scientist. She was a force of nature, and her story was just getting started. Fast forward to the early 1900s, and Curie was on the brink of becoming the scientific equivalent of a rock star, albeit one who preferred test tubes to electric guitars. In 1903, she and her husband Pierre, along with Henry Becquerel, were awarded the Nobel Prize in Physics. This was the first of its kind for Marie, but it was also the first time a woman had ever been awarded the Nobel Prize. Talk about shattering glass ceilings with a radioactive sledgehammer. Now, if you think this was the moment the scientific community all stood up and cheered, you'd be half right. The French Academy of Sciences, in their infinite wisdom, initially tried to exclude her from the nomination, preferring to keep the accolades within their male-dominated circle. It took Pierre's insistence to get her name on the ticket. Apparently, even in the face of undeniable brilliance, some people still needed a nudge the size of a Nobel Prize to acknowledge a woman's contribution. Let's talk numbers. The Nobel Prize came with a cash award of 70,000 Swedish krona. In today's terms, that's roughly equivalent to $400,000. Not exactly chump change, but considering the Curies had been working in conditions akin to a medieval alchemist's lair, it was practically a windfall. The couple used the prize money to further their research, because why buy a vacation home when you can buy more pitchblende? But with fame came the spotlight, and with the spotlight came the kind of attention that makes you want to crawl back into your lab and lock the door. The media frenzy surrounding Curie was unprecedented. Headlines gushed about her as the Queen of Science, a title that probably made Marie roll her eyes so hard she could see her own brain. The public's fascination with her was a mix of genuine admiration and the allure of novelty. Imagine a woman who wasn't just dabbling in science, but leading the charge. The press, ever hungry for a narrative, often painted Curie as a solitary genius, ignoring the fact that science, much like a good soufflé, requires a delicate balance of ingredients and teamwork. Pierre's sudden death in 1906 only intensified this narrative, transforming Marie into a tragic heroine of sorts, the lone widow carrying on her husband's work. Never mind that she had been a driving force all along. The story was just too good to let facts get in the way. And then there was the matter of her second Nobel Prize, this time in chemistry in 1911, awarded for her services to the advancement of chemistry by the discovery of the elements radium and polonium, the isolation of radium, and the study of the nature and compounds of this remarkable element. She was the first person, male or female, to win 2 Nobel Prizes in different scientific fields. This should have been the part where everyone collectively bowed down to her genius, but instead it triggered a scandal. Rumors of an affair with physicist Paul Langevin, a married man, hit the newspapers like a tabloid explosion, sullying her reputation in the eyes of the public. It was a classic case of society's penchant for tearing down what it had just put on a pedestal. The real kicker: the Nobel Committee tried to persuade her to skip the award ceremony to avoid further scandal. Curie, in a move that can only be described as legendary, attended anyway, all but daring them, and the world, to challenge her right to be there. Her response to the committee's suggestion was as sharp as a freshly honed scalpel. The prize has been given to me for the discovery of radium and polonium. I believe there is no connection between my scientific work and the facts of private life. Her struggles with the press were relentless. In an era where privacy was a luxury few could afford, Curie found herself under constant scrutiny. Her every move was dissected, her character questioned. The media circus was less about her scientific achievements and more about selling papers. It's the kind of thing that makes you want to scream into a pillow, or better yet, into the pages of a scientific journal where at least people care about the science. Despite the chaos, Curie's contributions to radioactivity were monumental. She coined the term radioactivity itself, a word that would define an entire field of study. Her work laid the groundwork for future generations of scientists, opening up possibilities that would eventually lead to everything from cancer treatments to nuclear power. The irony, of course, is that the very thing that brought her fame also contributed to her demise. Constant exposure to radioactive materials, in an age where lab safety was more of a suggestion than a practice, took its toll on her health, ultimately leading to her death in 1934 from aplastic anemia. Marie Curie's reflections on her achievements reveal a woman who was acutely aware of her place in history, yet deeply pragmatic about her work. She once remarked, "I am among those who think that science has great beauty." For Curie, science wasn't just a profession. It was a calling, a labor of love that transcended the accolades and the controversies. She was a pioneer in every sense of the word, navigating a world that was often hostile to her presence with a determination that was as unwavering as the elements she discovered. In the end, Curie's legacy is a testament to the power of perseverance in the face of adversity. Her story is one of grit, intellect, and a refusal to be defined by the limitations of her time. She was a trailblazer in a world that desperately needed one, and her contributions to science and society continue to resonate today. As we look back on her life, it's clear that Curie was more than just a scientist. She was a force for change, a beacon of possibility lighting the way for those who would follow in her footsteps. Her story isn't just a chapter in the history of science. It's a reminder that the pursuit of knowledge is a path worth treading, no matter the obstacles. Marie Curie's legacy isn't just a chapter in the history of science. It's a reminder that the pursuit of knowledge is a path worth treading, no matter the obstacles. And obstacles, dear friends, were something Curie was intimately familiar with, especially when the world went topsy-turvy during World War I. Picture this. The year is 1914, and Europe is tearing itself apart in a conflict that would make even the most dramatic of soap operas look like a nursery rhyme. Enter Curie, not with a weapon, but with an X-ray machine, ready to revolutionize battlefield medicine. Now, let's set the scene. The Great War wasn't just a clash of armies. It was a brutal, grinding conflict where technology met the trenches in a deadly dance. Soldiers were being injured in ways that made traditional medical practices seem like patching up a popped balloon with duct tape. The need for precise, quick diagnostics was critical, and this is where Curie's ingenuity shone brighter than a radium dial in the dark. Faced with a dire shortage of medical resources, Curie didn't just sit around lamenting the state of affairs. No, she rolled up her sleeves and got to work, spearheading the development of mobile X-ray units, aptly nicknamed Little Curies. These were essentially X-ray machines on wheels, and they were about to become the unsung heroes of the battlefield. Curie, with her characteristic blend of brilliance and practicality, oversaw the conversion of cars into these mobile diagnostic units. The result? A fleet of over 20 Little Curies, each equipped with the technology to peek inside wounded soldiers and guide doctors in extracting bullets and shrapnel with precision that was previously unimaginable. But let's talk logistics, because this wasn't just a matter of slapping an X-ray machine into the back of a jalopy and calling it a day. Each unit cost around 10,000 francs to outfit, a small fortune at the time, particularly when the French economy was tied up in the war effort like a cat in a yarn ball. Curie, never one to shy away from a challenge, managed to secure funding through a combination of government grants and her own tireless fundraising. She even trained over 150 women to operate these machines, a move so progressive it might have caused some mustachioed generals to choke on their croissants. The impact of these Little Curies was nothing short of miraculous. By conservative estimates, they performed over 1 million examinations during the war. Imagine the difference between a soldier losing a limb and walking away with a bandage. The stakes were literally life and death, and Curie's innovation tipped the scales towards survival. The numbers are staggering. With each machine capable of examining up to 10 patients per day, the cumulative effect on the war effort was profound, saving countless lives and limbs. Of course, the absurdity of wartime innovation was not lost on Curie. She found herself in situations that would make a modern-day bureaucrat's head spin. Picture her, a Nobel Prize-winning scientist, negotiating with military officials who probably still thought X-ray was a brand of French perfume. Yet, she navigated these challenges with the same tenacity she applied to her scientific endeavors, applying her keen intellect to cut through red tape as deftly as she sliced through scientific dogma. But why did this matter so much? Beyond the immediate life-saving potential, Curie's efforts during the war set a precedent for the future of medical technology. She demonstrated the power of science to adapt to human needs, even in the most dire circumstances. Her work laid a foundation for the use of X-rays in civilian medicine, revolutionizing diagnostics in hospitals long after the war ended. It's a poignant reminder that sometimes the darkest times can illuminate the path to progress. And while we're myth-busting, let's address the romanticized notion of the lone innovator. Curie didn't single-handedly change battlefield medicine. She was part of a network of medical professionals, engineers, and volunteers who shared her vision. Her role was pivotal, no doubt, but it was a collective effort that brought the little Curies to life. The narrative of the solitary genius is compelling, sure, but in reality, Curie's success was a testament to collaboration, an orchestra of minds conducted by her relentless drive. As the war dragged on, Curie's adaptability in crisis situations became legendary. She didn't just rest on her laurels. She continued to innovate, exploring ways to improve the efficiency and reach of her mobile units. Her ability to pivot and respond to the ever-changing demands of the battlefield was as impressive as her scientific acumen. It's said that necessity is the mother of invention, and in this case, Curie was its tireless midwife. The economic context of Curie's wartime work is also worth noting. The war had a way of distorting economies, turning resources into scarcities overnight. France, battling on the front lines, faced financial strains that would make a banker weep. Yet, Curie's project not only received funding, but also thrived. It speaks volumes about her ability to articulate the value of her work, to persuade those in power that science wasn't a luxury, but a necessity in the war effort. Despite the chaos of war, Curie's dedication to her mission never wavered. She was a force of nature, a whirlwind of energy who refused to let the tumult of the times deter her from her goals. Her story during World War is a testament to the power of resilience and innovation in the face of adversity, a reminder that even amidst destruction, there is room for progress and hope. As the war ground on to its grim conclusion, Curie turned her focus back to her beloved research. The battlefield experiences had only deepened her understanding of the potential of science to heal and transform. But as the dust settled and the world began to pick up the pieces, Curie was ready to embark on the next chapter of her scientific journey. Her work during the war was a pivotal moment, one that highlighted her unique ability to harness the power of science for the greater good. And so, as we pause at this juncture, let's appreciate the full scope of Curie's impact. She wasn't just the queen of radioactivity. She was a pioneer of practical innovation, a trailblazer whose legacy continues to illuminate the path for scientists today. The story of her little Curies is a compelling chapter, rich with lessons about the power of determination, the importance of adaptability, and the incredible impact one woman can have on the world, even in its darkest hour. As we move forward, let's keep Curie's spirit of inquiry and resilience in mind, knowing that the story is far from over and the best is yet to come. As we move forward, let's keep Curie's spirit of inquiry and resilience in mind, knowing that the story is far from over and the best is yet to come. Now, let's dive into the post-war years and unravel the tangled web of Curie's legacy, a tale that's as much about what she left behind as it is about how we choose to remember her. Marie Curie's name probably rings a bell even to those who think radium is just a fancy way to say glow in the dark. Her impact on science is monumental, no doubt, but her legacy is wrapped in layers of myth that can obscure the gritty reality. Curie wasn't just a scientific icon. She was a human being with all the complexities and contradictions that come with the territory. The story we often hear is one of a lone genius, tirelessly toiling away in her lab, a narrative so appealing it practically begs for a Hollywood adaptation. But the truth, as always, has more shades of grey. Let's start with a hard look at her scientific contributions. Curie's work on radioactivity was groundbreaking. She coined the term radioactivity itself, a legacy that endures in the lexicon of science. Her discoveries of polonium and radium opened up new frontiers in physics and chemistry. Today, we benefit from her pioneering research in ways she could scarcely have imagined. Medical applications of radiation, from cancer treatments to imaging technologies, owe a debt to Curie's early work. However, there's a dark side too. The same discoveries laid the groundwork for nuclear weapons, a sobering reminder that scientific advancements are double-edged swords. Her personal life, too, is a rich tapestry of triumphs and trials. Often mythologized as the solitary genius, Curie's life was anything but isolated. Her collaboration with Pierre was integral to her success, although his untimely death in 1906 left her to navigate the scientific world alone. The narrative of her as a tragic widow inadvertently reinforced the myth of her as a lone trailblazer. In reality, she was surrounded by a community of scientists who both supported and occasionally undermined her efforts. The myth-making extends to her character. Curie is often depicted as a stoic figure, immune to the social norms of her time. Yet, she was acutely aware of the gender barriers she faced and navigated them with a strategic brilliance. Her second Nobel Prize in 1911, awarded amidst a swirl of scandal, showcases this. Rather than retreat in the face of public scrutiny, she stood firm, attending the ceremony despite the media circus. It was a bold move that cemented her reputation as a woman who refused to be defined by anything other than her work. But what about the economic realities? Here's where myth meets cold, hard cash. Despite her Nobel wins, Curie was never financially secure. The prize money helped fund her research, sure, but it didn't translate to personal wealth. She often struggled to secure funding for her lab, a sobering reality that persists for many scientists today. Funding, after all, is the lifeblood of research, and Curie's ability to continue her work was a testament to her tenacity and resourcefulness. And let's not forget the societal impact of her work. Curie's legacy isn't just scientific, it's cultural too. She challenged the gender norms of her era, paving the way for future generations of women in STEM. Yet even today, gender equality in science remains an ongoing battle. Women continue to face biases, both subtle and overt, that can stifle their careers. Curie's life is a reminder of both how far we've come and how far we still have to go. Her story inspires modern scientists not just because of her discoveries, but because of her resilience and dedication. She demonstrated that science is not just about what you know, but what you're willing to endure in the pursuit of truth. Her ability to adapt and persevere in the face of adversity is a lesson that resonates across the generations. So, as we wrap up this journey through Curie's life, let's consider her legacy with both reverence and realism. She wasn't perfect. She was human, driven by a passion for discovery that transcended the limitations of her time. Her life was a series of calculated risks, bold moves, and relentless pursuit of knowledge. In her own words, we must have perseverance and above all confidence in ourselves. We must believe that we are gifted for something, and that this thing, at whatever cost, be attained. Curie's story is a testament to the power of perseverance and a reminder that science is ever-evolving. Her legacy is alive in every X-ray machine, every radiation therapy session, and every woman who steps into a lab and demands to be heard. As we continue to grapple with the challenges of gender equality in science, Curie's life serves as both a beacon and a challenge. Her story isn't just a chapter in the annals of history. It's a call to action, urging us to push the boundaries of what is possible. In the end, Marie Curie's legacy is like radium itself, both illuminating and dangerous, filled with potential for both creation and destruction. As we look back on her life, let's appreciate the full spectrum of her contributions, acknowledging the myths while celebrating the very real, very human person behind them. Her journey wasn't just about discovering elements. It was about redefining what it means to be a scientist, a pioneer, and a woman in a world that often preferred its heroines silent. In the story of Marie Curie, we find not just the past, but a blueprint for the future. Here's to Marie, the scientist, the trailblazer, and the legend who taught us that the pursuit of knowledge is a path worth treading, no matter the obstacles.